Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto is brought into the world of fairy tale and fell in love with Erza Scarlet. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Stranger in Scarlet's Shadow. The end was not a sound. It was a pressure, a sudden, impossible silence that swallowed the thunder of a world at war. One moment, there was the screech of reality tearing, the roar of 10,000 dying hopes, the guttural scream of a god progenitor being rent from her own dimension. The next, there was only the bone-deep hum of the most powerful sealing jutsu ever conceived. Naruto Uzumaki felt it in his teeth, a vibration that ran up his spine and settled in his skull like a tolling bell. His right hand, palm glowing with the sun seal, was pressed against Kaguya Otsutsuki's alabaster skin. Across from him, a mirror image of grim finality, was Sasuke, his own left hand alight with the moon. Between them, the rabbit goddess contorted, her third eye wide with disbelief, her form flickering as the six paths planetary devastation pulled her apart and bound her to a new, silent moon. It's over, Naruto thought. The thought wasn't a cheer. It was a gasp, the last ragged breath after a race he'd been running his entire life. He could feel Sakura's desperate hope from below, Kakashi's exhausted relief. He could feel the fading echo of his father's chakra, a final, proud pat on the back. And he felt Kurama, a rumbling presence of satisfaction and profound fatigue within him. You did it, kid. A ghost of a smile touched Naruto's lips. We did it. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't quite finished. As Kaguya's form was swallowed by the burgeoning satellite, the dimensional fabric she had warped and torn for her own ends began to collapse. It did not mend itself. It snapped back like a frayed rope, creating a backlash of raw, spatial energy. A hairline crack of pure, blinding white light split the air beside Naruto. It didn't belong. It was cleaner than lightning, more absolute than any light he had ever seen. It hummed with a frequency that made his sage mode-enhanced senses scream. Naruto. Sasuke's voice was a sharp command. He tried to pull back, but it was too late. The crack wasn't just a tear in space, it was a vacuum. It latched onto the massive, divine power radiating from him, the six paths chakra, the combined energy of nine-tailed beasts, the remnants of the final clash, and it pulled. The sensation was not of movement, but of being unwritten. His connection to the world, to the very natural energy he could mold as easily as his own breath, frayed and then snapped. The faces of his friends, of Sasuke, of Sakura, stretched and distorted as if seen through heated glass. The gravitational core of the sealing jutsu lost its purchase on him. Hold on, he heard, a distant, desperate shout. He was a leaf in a hurricane. His body, which seconds ago had withstood blows that could shatter mountains, felt fragile, torn between the gravity of his world and the impossible suction of the new one. The sun seal on his palm flared, a desperate anchor, but the energy of the backlash was primordial, chaotic. It wasn't jutsu. It was physics having a nervous breakdown. A final, gut-wrenching lurch. The world of shinobi, the faces of his comrades, the sky that held his enemy's new tomb, it all vanished, replaced by an unending, kaleidoscopic tunnel of screaming light and violent color. He was tumbling, end over end, through a place that had no up or down, only a constant, crushing forward momentum. Kurama roared in his soul, a sound of confusion and rage, a beast thrown into a cage it couldn't comprehend. The journey could have lasted an eternity or a nanosecond. He lost all track of himself. The exhaustion from the war, held at bay by adrenaline and the fate of the world, crashed over him in a debilitating wave. His six paths. Sage mode, his last connection to a power that felt familiar, flickered and died. The golden cloak of light dissolved, leaving him in his tattered orange and black jacket, bleeding from a dozen minor wounds. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The tunnel of light didn't fade, it shattered. He was ejected, spat out into reality with the force of a cannonball. He slammed into something solid, wood, thick and unyielding, and the impact was a chorus of agony. Branches whipped at his face, scraped his arms, tore at his clothes. He crashed through a canopy of leaves, the green a shocking, vibrant smear after the sterile white of the void, and then he was falling. The ground met him with a final, brutal thud that knocked the last of the air from his lungs. For a long moment, there was nothing but the damp smell of earth, the sharp scent of pine, and the coppery taste of blood in his mouth. Pain was an old friend, but this was different. It was a lonely pain, echoing in a space that felt terrifyingly empty. He lay there, face down in the dirt and ferns, his body a single, comprehensive ache. He tried to push himself up, but his arms trembled and gave way. Every muscle screamed. The dimensional transit had done more than just move him, it had wrung him out like a wet rag, leaving him drained to the very core of his cells. Kurama. He projected into the quiet of his mindscape. The response was slow, groggy. The familiar sewer of his inner world felt different. The water seemed murkier, the pipes less defined. The great fox himself was lying down, his 9 tails listless. "I'm here, Kit. Just, here." What in the sage's name was that? "I don't know," Naruto thought back, the effort making his head swim. Some kind of spatial backlash from the seal. He forced himself onto his elbows, his vision swimming. He was in a forest. A dense, ancient forest, the likes of which he hadn't seen since his training on Mount Myaboku. Sunlight dappled through a thick ceiling of leaves, painting the forest floor in shifting patterns of gold and green. The air was heavy, humid, and thrummed with a strange, vibrant energy. He closed his eyes, ignoring the pain, and focused. As a perfect sage, he was one with natural energy. He could feel its flow, its life, its very texture. In his world, it was a calm, steady river, a vast and deep ocean of power he could tap into. This was not that. This energy was crackling. It was a wild, untamed thing, buzzing in the air like a million tiny insects. It was more chaotic, more loud than the natural energy he knew. It sparkled in the atmosphere, visible to his sage-enhanced eyes as tiny, glittering motes of blue light that clung to everything, the trees, the leaves, the very soil. It was powerful, intoxicatingly so, but it felt alien. Foreign. The natural energy is wrong, Naruto's thought was a statement of dawning horror. It's not just the energy, Naruto, Kurama's voice was grim. I can't feel them. The others. Matatabi, Isabu, Son Goku, any of them. Our connection, it's gone. The words hit Naruto harder than the landing. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his senses, pushing past the boundaries of the forest, trying to find the familiar chakra signatures of the other tailed beasts, his brothers and sisters in power. He searched for for Gaara, for any familiar presence. Nothing. There was only the vast, buzzing static of this new world's energy and the yawning void where his connections used to be. The loneliness that had been a dull ache sharpened into a blade of pure panic. He wasn't just in a different place. He was in a different world. The realization settled not with a bang, but with a cold, sinking weight in the pit of his stomach. He was alone. Truly, utterly alone. The war was over, but he wasn't there to see the peace. He had saved his world only to be exiled from it. A bitter, hysterical laugh tried to bubble up from his chest, but he choked it down. No. Not now. Panic was a luxury. First, survive. Then, analyze. Then, find a way home. He was Naruto Uzumaki. He didn't give up. He pushed himself to his feet, swaying, his body protesting with every movement. He did a quick inventory. His jacket was torn to shreds, the black half hanging off his shoulder in ribbons. His pants were ripped at the knee. The pouch of kunai and shuriken at his hip was gone, lost in the transit. All he had were the clothes on his back and the 2 sealed scrolls containing his father's flying thunder god kunai and some emergency supplies strapped to his lower back. He checked them. Miraculously, they were still there. He still had Kurama. He still had Sage Mode, though he was too drained to sustain it for long. He still had the truth-seeking orbs, which hovered dormant behind his back, visible only to him. He was wounded, exhausted, and cosmically lost, but he was not helpless. He took a step, and then another, his senses on high alert. The forest was eerily quiet. No birdsong, no chittering of animals. Just the wind rustling the leaves and the faint, pervasive hum of this new energy. It was the silence of a place that was holding its breath. He began to walk, with no destination in mind other than, away from here. He needed to find civilization, information. He needed to understand the rules of this new world. It was as he crested a small, moss-covered ridge that he felt it. It was a sudden spike in the ambient energy, a distortion so violent it was like a scream in the quiet hum. It was a massive concentration of power, dark and ravenous. It felt like hatred, like hunger, like a bottomless grave. And beneath it, a smaller, intensely bright point of light was fighting back. This light was different. It was sharp, structured, and burned with a fierce, unwavering determination. It was the strange, crackling energy of this world, but focused, wielded like a sword. Someone was in a desperate fight. The instinct to help, the core of his very being, overrode his exhaustion and his caution. He didn't hesitate. He pushed off the ridge, his movements a blur of orange and black, and raced toward the disturbance. The trees became a green smear as he moved, his tired muscles screaming in protest, but he ignored them. The sounds of battle reached him now, the ringing clash of steel, the guttural roar of something immense, and the sharp, strained breaths of a fighter. He broke through a final line of trees and stopped, his eyes widening at the scene before him. In a small, cratered clearing, a woman was locked in a life-or-death struggle. She was tall, clad in gleaming silver armor from head to toe, with a proud, winged crest on her helmet. In her hands, she wielded a simple, elegant longsword. But it was her hair that was most striking, a cascade of brilliant, impossible scarlet that spilled from her helm and flowed behind her like a banner of war. Her opponent was a nightmare. It was a hulking, vaguely humanoid creature, easily 12 feet tall. Its body wasn't made of flesh, but of writhing, coalesced shadows and gnarled, dead wood, with glowing purple runes shifting across its form. Its head was a grinning deer skull, and its claws were long, obsidian shards that seemed to cut not just the air, but the light itself. Naruto's sage senses flared. The creature was radiating that vile, hungry energy, and it was doing something else. It was actively consuming the buzzing energy in the air. It was a void, a drain. And the woman was in trouble. Her armor was dented and scored with deep gashes. Her movements, while precise and powerful, were becoming slower. Her breath came in ragged pants. She would parry a crushing blow from a shadowy claw, the impact sending shudders through her entire body, and try to counterattack, but her blade would glance off the monster's hide with a dull thud. Her attacks aren't working, Kurama noted, his voice sharp with analysis. The creature's body is dispersing the kinetic force. But it was worse than that. As Naruto watched, the woman disengaged, leaping back to create distance. She held up her free hand, and a complex, glowing circle of light and runes appeared before it. "Requip the night," she commanded, her voice strained but clear. Naruto felt a surge of that world's energy coalesce around her. But before the transformation could complete, the monster let out a low, guttural hum, and the runes on its body flared. The magical circle around the woman sputtered, flickered, and died. She stumbled, a hand going to her chest as if she'd been physically struck. "Magic, it's draining my magic." She gasped, her voice a mix of frustration and dawning dread. So that was it. The creature didn't just resist magic, it fed on it. Every spell she tried to cast would only make it stronger and leave her weaker. She was trapped, forced into a purely physical confrontation with a beast that outclassed her in raw strength and whose strange body composition rendered her sword strikes ineffective. She knew it, too. Naruto could see it in her stance. There was no fear, not a trace of it. But there was a grim, fatalistic resolve settling in her shoulders. The resolve of a soldier preparing to make a final, costly stand. She readjusted her grip on her sword, her knuckles white. She was going to die here, fighting for every last inch. Naruto had seen that look before. He'd seen it on old man Sarutobi. He'd seen it on Neji. He'd seen it on his own parents. It was the look of someone laying down their life for something they believed in. And he was not going to let it happen. Not again. Not while he was here. Exhaustion was forgotten. The pain was irrelevant. The loneliness was replaced by a singular, burning purpose. He was a shinobi of Konoha. He protected people. It was that simple. The monster raised both of its massive claws, preparing for a final, crushing blow. The scarlet-haired knight braced herself, her sword held before her in a desperate, final guard. She never had to block it. From the woman's perspective, one moment the grave phantom of the Whispering Woods was poised to end her. The next, a flash of orange and black exploded from the tree-line. It was not a magical teleportation, it was sheer, physics-defying speed. A figure, a young man she had never seen before, appeared between her and the monster. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have any discernible magical aura. He was just, there. From Naruto's perspective, the world slowed to a crawl. The monster's attack was clumsy, telegraphed. He analyzed its posture, the distribution of its weight, the flow of its malevolent energy. He didn't have the chakra for a massive jutsu, but he didn't need one. He had something far more fundamental. He met the first claw not with a block, but with an open palm. Applying the principle of the gentle fist he'd seen Hyuga use 1,000 times, he didn't try to stop the force. He redirected it. A subtle twist of his wrist, a shift of his weight, and the monster's own momentum sent its massive arm careening harmlessly to the side, where it shattered a boulder. The creature roared in frustration and swung with its other claw. Naruto ducked under the attack, his movement so fluid it was like he was made of water. He flowed inside the monster's guard, his body a hair's breadth from its shadowy hide. His left hand shot out, fingers straight and stiff, and jabbed into the center of the creature's chest. It wasn't a chakra-infused strike. It was pure, focused physical force, delivered with the precision of a master surgeon. A shockwave, visible for a split second as a distortion in the air, radiated from the point of impact. The creature, which had shrugged off sword strikes, convulsed as if it had been struck by lightning. Its entire torso rippled, and it stumbled back, a wheezing, guttural sound escaping its skeletal maw. Behind him, Naruto heard a sharp, shocked intake of breath. He paid it no mind. The monster was angry now. It abandoned its physical attacks and opened its mouth. A sphere of swirling, purple-black energy began to form, a vortex of the same magic-devouring power it radiated. It was gathering ambient energy, a charged particle cannon of pure void. "That's bad," Kurama grumbled. "Even for you, that will hurt." "Then I won't let it fire," Naruto replied in his mind. He didn't give it the chance. He blurred forward again, but this time, his right hand was cupped at his side. The buzzing, crackling energy of this world was alien, but all energy had a source, a flow. He couldn't mold it into a jutsu, but he could still use his own. He dipped into the deep, warm reserves of his own chakra, the familiar power of his own life force, and spun it. A high-pitched, warbling whine filled the clearing, a sound like 1,000 birds taking flight at once. A sphere of violent, rotating blue light appeared in his palm, so bright and so pure it seemed to cast the monster's shadows back. It was a perfect, standard Rasengan. No sage art, no tailed beast infusion. Just pure, unadulterated rotational power. The woman in armor, Erza Scarlet, watched, her mind utterly failing to process what she was seeing. It wasn't a spell. There was no chant, no magical circle, no complex formula. The boy had simply willed a miniature, contained hurricane into existence in his hand. The raw, untamed power radiating from it was unlike any magic she had ever felt. It was primal, focused, and utterly terrifying. The monster, sensing the immense threat, tried to finish charging its attack. Naruto was already there. Rasengan, he yelled, the single word a sharp bark of effort. He thrust his hand forward, slamming the sphere of spinning chakra into the monster's chest, right where he had struck it before. There was no grand explosion, not at first. There was a moment of absolute silence as the Rasengan met the creature's shadowy form. The spinning vortex of chakra didn't detonate, it ground. It tore into the monster's unstable body, ripping it apart on a molecular level. The creature's shadowy form was pulled into the sphere, shredded into nothingness. Then, the energy had nowhere else to go. It erupted. A dome of azure light and violent, spiraling wind exploded outward. It didn't burn or freeze, it simply annihilated. It scoured the ground, pulverized rocks, and uprooted trees, carving a perfect, 20-meter crater in the forest floor. The shockwave hit Erza like a physical blow, forcing her to plant her feet and raise a vambrace to shield her face from the blast of wind and debris. When the light faded, the silence that returned was absolute. The monster was gone. Not defeated, not slain. It was erased. Utterly and completely. In the center of the newly formed crater stood the strange young man, his arms still outstretched. His bright orange jacket was in tatters, his blonde hair was matted with dirt and sweat, and he was breathing heavily. He stood there for a moment, his shoulders slumped. The adrenaline that had carried him through the fight drained away, and the crushing, bone-deep exhaustion returned with a vengeance. The world tilted violently. The last of his strength evaporated. He saw the woman in scarlet armor take a hesitant step toward him, her sword still held at the ready. Her helmet was gone, knocked off by the blast, revealing a face of stunning, severe beauty, framed by that impossible red hair. Her brown eyes were wide with a mixture of awe, suspicion, and utter disbelief. He wanted to say something. To ask where he was. To tell her she was safe. But the words wouldn't form. His vision was tunneling, black spots dancing at the edges. Guess I overdid it, was his last coherent thought. And then Naruto Uzumaki, the hero of the Fourth Great Ninja War, the savior of his world, collapsed face-first onto the ravaged earth of a world he did not know. Erza Scarlet remained frozen for a full 10 seconds, her mind reeling. The S-Class quest to subdue the Grave Phantom, a creature that had nullified the magic of 2 entire teams before her, was over. It had been ended in less than 30 seconds by a boy who had appeared out of nowhere. She slowly, cautiously, walked toward his unmoving form. Her instincts, honed by 100 battles, were screaming. He was an unknown. His power was an anomaly, a terrifying force of nature that operated outside every known law of magic. He could be a demon, a monster in human form, a harbinger of something far worse than the creature he had just destroyed. The logical, tactical part of her brain, the part that had made her fairy tales Titania, told her to treat him as a potential enemy of catastrophic proportions. But as she stood over him, she saw the state he was in. He was young, perhaps her age, maybe a little younger. His clothes were ruined, and beneath the dirt and grime, she could see a network of old, faded scars mixed with fresh wounds. He was completely unconscious, his breathing shallow. He wasn't feigning weakness, this was the total shutdown of a body pushed far beyond its limits. She saw the raw, unadulterated power that had erased the Grave Phantom. But she also saw the vulnerability of the boy who had collapsed immediately after using it. He had intervened to save her, a complete stranger. He had used a power that clearly cost him dearly, not for glory or malice, but to protect. Her gaze softened. He was a soldier. She knew the look of one. The weariness in his bones was something she understood on a fundamental level. Erza sheathed her sword. The sound of the steel sliding into its scabbard was loud in the profound silence. She knelt, her armored knees sinking into the soft dirt. With a grunt of effort, she carefully rolled him over. His face was peaceful in unconsciousness, stripped of the fierce concentration he'd worn in battle. He looked lost. For a long moment, she considered her options. She could leave him. She could report him to the Magic Council. He was, by definition, a threat of unknown magnitude. It was her duty. But she was also a mage of fairy tale. And fairy tale didn't abandon people. Especially not people who had, for whatever reason, thrown themselves in harm's way to save one of their own. She made her choice. With a strength that belied her slender frame, she hooked her armored arms under his shoulders and knees. He was heavier than he looked, dense with muscle. Gritting her teeth, she lifted him from the ground in a fireman's carry. He was a dead weight, a burden of power and mystery. But as she stood, settling his unconscious form across her shoulders, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a responsibility. She turned her back on the crater, the lingering smell of ozone and raw power, and began the long walk out of the whispering woods. Her destination was a place of chaos and laughter, of family and fury. She was taking him home. Miles away, in the gleaming white city of Erza, the heart of the Magic Council's power, alarms were blaring. Technicians in crisp, formal robes ran back and forth in the central monitoring chamber, their faces pale with shock. At the center of the room, a massive, three-dimensional lacrima map of Fiori was blinking with a single, furious red light. Report, a cold, commanding voice cut through the noise. All activity ceased. The technicians froze and turned to face the man who stood on a raised dais, observing the chaos with an unnerving calm. Chairman Valerius was a man in his late 50s, his silver hair impeccably neat, his face a mask of aristocratic stoicism. He wore the pristine white and gold robes of his office, and his eyes, the color of cold steel, missed nothing. A trembling, senior analyst stepped forward. "Sir. We detected a spatial anomaly approximately 1 hour ago in the eastern forests of Fiori. A momentary tear in the fabric of reality. We classified it as a natural phenomenon. And..." Valerius's voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that made the air feel heavy. "And then, this," the analyst stammered, gesturing to the blinking map. 37 minutes ago, the location of that anomaly registered an energy spike. Chairman, spike is the wrong word. It was a vertical line. Our ether nanoseismographs, our latent magic detectors, our reality stability sensors, they all went past their maximum threshold simultaneously. Valerius's gaze narrowed. What was the magical signature? The analyst swallowed hard. That's the issue, sir. There wasn't one. The energy released was not ether nano. It doesn't match any known elemental magic, any holder type, any ancient spell, or any dark curse in our archives. It registers as pure physical force. A kinetic event with the power of a Jupiter-class convergence cannon, but with the magical footprint of a thrown rock. Valerius was silent for a moment, his gloved fingers steepled before his face. He stared at the blinking red dot on the map, a point of absolute impossibility in his perfectly ordered world. Unregistered. Unclassified. Unquantifiable. It was a weapon. A god-tier weapon had just been detonated in his country, and he had no idea what it was, who wielded it, or why. This was not a mystery to be solved. It was a threat to be contained. "Deploy a reconnaissance team," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet every person in the room heard it perfectly. "I want eyes on that location. Find the source of that energy. And when you do," his steel-gray eyes glinted with cold, absolute resolve, "bring it to me." Chapter 2, The Whispers of Magnolia. The first thing to return was sound. Not the violent, reality-shredding shriek of the dimensional void, but a soft, rhythmic creaking, like an old ship rocking on a gentle sea. The second was scent, a sharp, herbal aroma of dried leaves and something vaguely antiseptic, a smell that tickled the nose and spoke of healing. The third was a voice, a gruff, cantankerous grumbling that seemed to be directed at him, or at least the space he occupied. Humph, humans. Always pushing their bodies until they snap. No sense of moderation. And this one is particularly nonsensical. His energy pathways are a disaster. Naruto's eyes fluttered open. The world swam into focus, a blurry collection of brown and white. He was lying on his back, in a bed that was surprisingly comfortable. A rough, woven blanket was pulled up to his chest. He turned his head, the movement sending a dull throb through his temples, and found the source of the voice. She was a woman with vibrant pink hair tied up in a distinctive bun, her face a cross mask of clinical disapproval. She was peering at his arm, which was resting outside the blanket, her expression like that of a mechanic looking at a hopelessly busted engine. His life force, it's immense, like a sun, she muttered to herself, but it's tangled with something else. Something ancient and furious. And the flow of his ether nano is practically non-existent. It's a miracle he can even stand, let alone do, whatever it is he did. Ether nano. The word was alien, but he understood the context. She was sensing his chakra network, and finding it utterly foreign. He was a square peg in a world of round holes. He tried to sit up, and a wave of dizziness washed over him. The woman's head snapped up, her sharp eyes fixing on him. "Stay down, you fool," she snapped, though there was no real heat in her voice. "Your body has undergone severe systemic shock. I've healed your superficial wounds, but the internal strain is another matter entirely. You're lucky that Night Girl has the constitution of a pack mule, carrying you all this way." Night Girl. The image flashed in his mind, gleaming silver armor, a battered sword, and a cascade of impossible scarlet hair. The woman who was about to die before he intervened. "Where," he began, his voice a dry rasp. "You're in the infirmary of the Fairy Tale Guild Hall, in the town of Magnolia," a new voice answered. It was a kind, aged voice, full of a gentle authority that reminded him instantly of the third Hokage. Naruto turned his head toward the door. Standing there was a man of incredibly short stature, dwarfed even by the woman at his bedside. He had a bald head fringed with white hair, a thick white mustache, and wore a simple, almost jester-like outfit of an orange tunic over a striped shirt. But his eyes were ancient. They held a wisdom and a quiet power that completely belied his comical appearance. Naruto had seen eyes like that before, in the leaders of nations and the masters of powerful clans. This was a man in charge. The pink-haired woman huffed. "He's your problem now, Makarov. I've done what I can. Just try to keep him from exploding. I hate cleaning up messes." With that, she turned and shuffled out of the room, muttering about the foolishness of youth. The short man, Makarov, chuckled. He walked over to the bed and hopped onto a stool, which brought him roughly to eye level with Naruto. "Don't mind poor Lyusica. Her bedside manner is an acquired taste. I am Makarov Dreyer, the master of this guild. And you, young man, have caused quite a stir." Naruto slowly pushed himself into a sitting position, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His body still felt heavy, lethargic, but the sharp edges of the pain were gone. His tattered orange jacket and ruined shirt had been removed, leaving him in his black undershirt and pants. He noticed they had been cleaned and neatly folded on a chair nearby. "Naruto," he said, his voice a little stronger now. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki." "Naruto," Makarov repeated, tasting the name. A strong name. "Tell me, Naruto Uzumaki from a land with no ether nano, what brings you to my guild, leaving a crater in the eastern forest that the council is already making a fuss about?" His tone was light, but the question was a razor. Naruto met the old man's gaze. He could feel no deceit from him, only a deep, genuine curiosity and a surprising lack of fear. In his world, a display of power like the one he'd unleashed would have been met with immediate suspicion and a squadron of umbu. Here, he was being offered a seat and a conversation. He chose his words carefully. The truth was too complex, too unbelievable. Ninja, chakra, tailed beasts, a war with a goddess from the moon, they would think he was insane. "I'm not from around here," Naruto started, looking down at his hands. "There was an accident. A transportation technique went wrong. I was pulled from my home and ended up in that forest. I don't know how to get back." He omitted the different world part. "One step at a time." Makarov stroked his mustache, his ancient eyes watching Naruto's face intently. He wasn't just listening to the words, he was reading the boy in front of him. He saw the flicker of deep, profound loss in Naruto's eyes when he mentioned his home. He sensed the ironclad control the boy was exerting over himself, a discipline forged in fire. And beneath it all, he felt a well of power so vast it was like sitting at the edge of the ocean. But it wasn't a malevolent power. It was warm, vibrant, like the sun itself. And it was profoundly lonely. "An accident," Makarov said softly. "I see. And the creature in the forest?" "It was going to kill her," Naruto said simply, looking up. "The woman with the red hair. I couldn't let that happen." There it was. The core of him, laid bare in a single, unadorned sentence. Makarov had seen countless mages in his long life, mages who fought for glory, for money, for fame, for revenge. But this boy, a stranger in a strange land, had thrown himself into a battle against an S-class monster for the purest reason of all, because it was the right thing to do. A wide, warm smile spread across Makarov's face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. In that moment, he made a decision. The council could send their letters and their threats. Logic and caution could scream all they wanted. But the heart of Fairy Tail beat to a different drum. "Every person who walks through that door has a story," Naruto Uzumaki, Makarov said, his voice full of warmth. "Some are running from something. Some are searching for something. Most are just looking for a place to belong. A family. Here, we don't care where you come from. We care who you are. And I can see who you are." He hopped off the stool. "You are welcome to stay here for as long as you need. Rest, recover. We'll help you find a way back to your home, if we can. Until then, consider yourself under the protection of Fairy Tail." Naruto stared at him, stunned into silence. He had expected interrogation, suspicion, maybe even imprisonment. He had been prepared for a fight. He was not prepared for this unconditional acceptance. It was so reminiscent of Iruka-sensei, of Jiraiya, of his father. A lump formed in his throat. "Why?" he asked, the single word thick with emotion. Makarov paused at the door and looked back, his expression gentle. "Because you have the eyes of one of my children. Lost, a little broken, but with a good heart. Now, when you feel up to it, come out to the main hall. The others are eager to meet the boy who fell from the sky." With a final nod, he left, leaving Naruto alone in the quiet room, the scent of herbs and the weight of an old man's kindness filling the air. For the first time since he'd arrived in this strange, new world, the crushing weight of his loneliness eased, just a little. He had found a port in the storm. An hour later, Naruto felt steady enough to walk. He pulled on his cleaned but still tattered pants and undershirt, forgoing the ruined jacket. He strapped the precious scrolls to his back, a familiar comfort. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the infirmary door and stepped out into the world of Fairy Tail. The shift in atmosphere was instantaneous and overwhelming. The infirmary had been an oasis of calm. The main guild hall was a symphony of glorious chaos. The vast, two-story hall was packed with people shouting, laughing, drinking, and cheering. A table flew through the air, trailing mugs of foaming ale, and crashed into a pillar, which seemed to barely shudder. A man with more piercings than Naruto could count was trying to eat fire from a torch. A girl with blue hair was serving drinks while trying to dodge a chair that had been thrown in her direction. It was loud. It was messy. It was utter bedlam. And it felt wonderfully, achingly familiar. It was the frantic energy of the Konoha marketplace, the rowdy camaraderie of his friends at Ichiraku Ramen, all dialed up to 11. A genuine, unforced smile touched his lips. He walked down a short flight of stairs into the main hall, and his presence did not go unnoticed. A ripple of silence spread out from him. Conversations died down. The brawling stopped mid-punch. All eyes turned to him. He could feel their gazes, curiosity, awe, suspicion, and in a few cases, pure, unadulterated excitement. He saw the woman from the forest. Erza. She was sitting at a table with a dark-haired young man who was inexplicably stripping off his shirt, a cheerful blonde girl, and a flying blue cat. Erza was no longer in her battered armor. She wore a simple white blouse and a blue skirt, her scarlet hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable, but she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Before anyone else could speak, a blur of pink and yellow shot across the room, leaving a trail of embers in its wake. A young man with spiky, salmon-colored hair and a scaly white scarf skidded to a halt directly in front of Naruto, a wide, predatory grin on his face. His eyes held a feral intensity that Naruto recognized instantly, the eagerness of a born fighter. "So you're the guy," the kid shouted, his voice booming with energy. "They said you took out that phantom thing without any magic. I can feel the heat comin' off you. You're strong. Fight me." The guild collectively groaned. "Natsu, you idiot, he just got out of the infirmary," the blonde girl yelled. "Leave him alone, flame brain," the now shirtless man added, a smirk on his face. Natsu completely ignored them, bouncing on the balls of his feet like a caged animal. "Come on. Just a quick one. I wanna see what you can do." Naruto looked at him. He saw the challenge, the pure, unfiltered desire to test his strength against a new opponent. It wasn't malicious. It was the only way this kid, Natsu, knew how to communicate, how to understand someone. Naruto had been the same way once. Fighting was his language. He could have refused. He could have condescended. But that would have been an insult. To truly be accepted here, he needed to speak their language. Naruto's smile widened. "All right," he said, his voice calm and clear, carrying easily over the renewed murmurs of the guild. "Just a quick one." A roar of approval went up from the crowd. They quickly cleared a space in the center of the hall, tables and chairs shoved aside with practiced efficiency. Makarov watched from the second-floor balcony, a knowing look on his face. Erza stood up, her arms crossed, her analytical gaze missing nothing. Natsu grinned, a feral, joyful expression. "All right. I'm all fired up." He slammed his fists together, and they erupted in brilliant orange flames. Fire Dragon's Iron Fist. He launched himself at Naruto, his fist a comet of fire and force. To the assembled mages, it was a terrifyingly fast and powerful attack. To Naruto, it was happening in slow motion. He didn't move from his spot. He simply waited. At the last possible second, as the flaming fist was inches from his face, he tilted his head to the side. The attack sailed past him, the heat washing over his cheek. Natsu's momentum carried him forward, and Naruto, in a single, fluid motion, stepped to the side and lightly tapped the back of Natsu's knee. It was a simple, biomechanical trick. Natsu's forward leg buckled, throwing his balance completely off. He stumbled, catching himself before he could fall, and spun around, a look of surprise on his face. "Hey! Not bad." Natsu roared, and unleashed a torrent of fire from his mouth. Fire Dragon's Roar. A massive jet of flame surged toward Naruto, hot enough to melt steel. The guild members braced themselves for the impact. Naruto didn't even flinch. He took one quick step to his left. The entire inferno passed by him, scorching the wall behind where he had been standing. He hadn't dodged it so much as he had simply ceased to be in its path, his movement so economical it was barely perceptible. The guild was silent now. This wasn't a fight. It was a demonstration. Natsu was getting frustrated. He was throwing his best attacks, and this stranger was avoiding them without even trying. He wasn't blocking, he wasn't countering, he was just, not getting hit. It was like trying to punch smoke. Hold still. Natsu yelled, launching a flurry of flaming punches and kicks. Naruto moved. He flowed around the attacks, a leaf on the wind. He weaved under a punch, sidestepped a kick, his hands held loosely at his sides. He never took his eyes off Natsu's, his expression calm, almost placid. He was analyzing, learning, understanding the rhythm of his opponent. Erza watched, her breath caught in her throat. She had fought Natsu hundreds of times. She knew his patterns, his speed, his power. She could beat him, yes, but it always required effort. It was always a fight. This was different. Naruto was making Natsu look like a child flailing in the dark. The level of skill, of pure martial proficiency, was something she had never witnessed before. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. Natsu, red-faced and panting, put everything into one last, desperate charge. He propelled himself forward with a blast of fire from his feet, his fist cocked back for a decisive blow. This time, Naruto didn't dodge. He met the charge. As Natsu came within range, Naruto raised his right hand. He moved so quickly that most people didn't even see it. He didn't block the punch. He didn't catch it. He simply flicked Natsu on the forehead with his middle finger. It was a small, almost delicate motion. But behind it was a lifetime of chakra control, of focusing immense power into a single, infinitesimal point. The impact was no stronger than a schoolyard flick, but it carried a kinetic shock that Natsu's body was completely unprepared for. Natsu's eyes went wide with shock. His charge stopped dead. His body, from the neck down, seemed to lose all its tension. He staggered backward one step, then two, his legs wobbling like a newborn foal's. He looked down at his own hands, then back at Naruto, a look of profound, utter confusion on his face. Then, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he tipped over, landing on the floor with a dull thud, unconscious. The guild hall was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Everyone stared. First at Natsu, out cold on the floor. Then at Naruto, who was calmly lowering his hand, an apologetic look on his face. "Ah," Naruto said, scratching the back of his head. "Maybe I used a little too much force." The silence held for another second, and then it broke. Not with a cheer, but with a wave of disbelieving laughter and shouted commentary. "Did you see that? He knocked Natsu out with a flick. What kind of monster is this guy?" Gray, the shirtless man, walked over and nudged Natsu's prone form with his foot. "Ha! Serves you right, you pyro." He looked up at Naruto, a new level of respect in his eyes. "Nice one. I'm Gray." "Naruto," he replied, shaking the offered hand. From the balcony, Makarov chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. "Well," he declared to the guild at large. "It seems our guest knows how to handle himself. Let this be a lesson to you all. Power isn't just about making the biggest explosion." Naruto felt 100 eyes on him, but the animosity was gone, replaced by a rowdy, curious acceptance. He had passed their test. He had spoken their language. And from across the room, he saw Erza looking at him, a small, genuine smile finally gracing her lips. Later that evening, the guild had settled back into its usual rhythm, albeit with Naruto as the subject of most of the whispered conversations. He had found a quiet spot on the second-floor balcony, leaning against the railing and looking out over the town of Magnolia. The town was bathed in the warm, orange glow of twilight. Lights were twinkling on in the houses that lined the canal, their reflections dancing on the water. It was peaceful. It was a kind of peace he had fought and bled for, but had never really gotten to experience. Konoha was always rebuilding, always vigilant, always preparing for the next threat. This place, it felt settled. It felt safe. He heard footsteps behind him and turned. It was Erza. She was holding 2 plates, and on each was a slice of strawberry cake, piled high with whipped cream. She wordlessly handed one to him. Naruto looked at the cake, then back at her, surprised. "For me?" Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "You saved my life in the forest." And, she added, a hint of amusement in her tone, "you managed to shut Natsu up for a few hours. Both are worthy of reward." He chuckled and took the plate. "I overheard Kana mention you liked this stuff. Figured the least I could do was buy you a slice. You beat me to it." His comment seemed to catch her off guard. A faint blush dusted her cheeks. "You are observant." She moved to stand beside him at the railing, taking a delicate bite of her cake. For a few moments, they stood in a comfortable silence, watching the town wind down for the evening. "Your power," she said finally, not looking at him. "The master said you have no ether nano. The sphere of light you used, the way you moved, it's not magic. It's called chakra," Naruto said, deciding that much was safe to share. "It's the energy I use in my homeland. It's different from what you have here." "Chakra," she repeated, testing the word. "The control you have over it is incredible. To defeat Natsu without hurting him, that requires more strength than simply overpowering him." "Power is useless without control," Naruto said, quoting one of Jiraiya's first lessons. He took a bite of the cake. It was sweet, rich, and surprisingly good. Making a big mess is easy. Knowing when not to is the hard part. He looked at her, at the way she stood, her posture perfect, her shoulders squared, even in her casual clothes. She was never truly at ease. She was a weapon, always ready. He recognized the stance. He recognized the tension. It was the same way he used to be, always expecting the next attack, the next betrayal. "That armor you wear," he said quietly, changing the subject. "It's more than just protection, isn't it?" Erza stiffened, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. She turned to look at him fully, her brown eyes searching his. "What do you mean?" "It's a wall," Naruto said, his voice gentle but firm. He wasn't accusing, just stating a fact. "You use it to keep people away. To keep your heart safe. I used to do the same thing." Her composure, the unshakable mask of Titania, faltered. He was seeing right through her, past the S-class title, past the legendary armor, to the scared little girl she kept locked away inside. No one had ever done that. They either feared her, respected her, or challenged her. No one had ever simply seen her. "I was loud," Naruto continued, his gaze drifting back to the town below. "Obnoxious. I picked fights. I painted monuments. I made sure everyone was looking at me, so they'd never see how lonely I really was. It was my armor." He smiled, a sad, distant smile. "It's heavy, isn't it? Carrying all that weight by yourself." Erza didn't answer. She couldn't. The words were lodged in her throat. He understood. This stranger, this boy from another world, understood the deepest, most guarded part of her soul without her having to say a single word. He wasn't just strong. He was wise, in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with pain. You are a strange man, Naruto Uzumaki," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, and his blue eyes were startlingly clear, full of a warmth that seemed to push back the ever-present shadows in her heart. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe we're not so different, Erza Scarlet." A connection sparked between them in that moment, silent and profound. It wasn't the fiery passion of Natsu or the cool rivalry of Grey. It was the quiet, solemn recognition of two soldiers who had fought too many wars, seen too much darkness, and were just now realizing they weren't standing on the battlefield alone anymore. The tender moment was shattered by a sudden, frantic shout from below. "Master! We have a problem." They both looked down. A junior guild member was running into the hall, his face pale with panic. A moment later, the main doors of the guild hall swung open with a loud bang. Standing in the doorway was a figure in the formal, sterile white uniform of a magic council messenger. He held a staff topped with the council's insignia, and his face was a mask of cold, bureaucratic arrogance. Flanking him were two heavily armored rune knights, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. The entire guild fell silent. The air crackled with a new, hostile tension. Makarov appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his expression grim. The messenger took a step forward, his staff striking the wooden floor with an imperious thud. "By order of the Magic Council and Chairman Valerius," he announced, his voice ringing with smug authority, "Fairy Tail is to surrender the unregistered foreign anomaly known as Naruto for immediate detainment and questioning." The messenger's staff glowed faintly, a small lacrima at its tip secretly scanning Naruto, recording every detail of his unique energy signature and transmitting it in real time to a dark chamber in Erza. Naruto's hand instinctively went to the scrolls on his back. His brief moment of peace was over. He was a target again. He looked at Makarov. The old man hadn't even glanced at him. His gaze was fixed on the messenger, his small frame seeming to grow in stature, radiating an aura of immovable power. "And if we refuse?" Makarov asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The messenger smirked. "Refusal to comply will be considered an act of aggression against the council and the nation of Fiori. You will be branded an enemy of the state." The threat hung in the air, thick and heavy. The guild members tensed, hands straying toward weapons, magical energy beginning to crackle around them. They were ready to go to war for a boy they had met only hours ago. Naruto watched, his heart pounding. He was the cause of this. He could end it. He could surrender. He could fight his way out. But Makarov didn't give him the chance to decide. The guild master took another step forward, his eyes burning with a fiery light. He spoke one word, a word of absolute defiance, a word that was the very soul of his guild. "No." Chapter 3, The Council's Gambit. Chairman Valerius's office was a monument to order. Located at the highest point of the council's gleaming white citadel in Erza, its vast, floor-to-ceiling window offered a panoramic, godlike view of the city below. The furniture was sparse and angular, carved from dark, polished wood and obsidian. There were no personal effects, no sentimental trinkets, only neat stacks of documents, a single inkwell, and a large, glowing communication lacrima at the center of his massive desk. Everything was in its proper place. The lacrima flickered to life, projecting the sneering face of the messenger he had sent to Fairy Tail. "Refusal, Chairman," the messenger's voice was laced with indignant fury. The old fool flatly refused. He practically spat on the council's authority. Valerius did not react. He remained seated, his fingers steepled, his cold gray eyes fixed on the projection. His gambit had been simple: present Fairy Tail with a non-negotiable demand backed by the full weight of the law. A reasonable guild, even a rowdy one, would comply to avoid open conflict. But Makarov Dreyer was not a reasonable man. He was a creature of pure, unadulterated sentiment. Valerius had counted on this. "And the target?" Valerius asked, his voice a low, calm murmur. He was there. The energy signature matched the anomaly perfectly. He stood with them. "Master Dreyer has declared the boy under Fairy Tail's protection." "I see," Valerius said. The corner of his mouth twitched, the barest hint of a satisfied smile. This was the justification he needed. Makarov had not just refused an order, he was harboring an unregistered, S-class threat. He had given Valerius the perfect pretext to escalate. Your service is concluded, messenger. Return to Erza. The lacrima image vanished. Valerius leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning softly. He had hoped to acquire the anomaly quietly. A simple detainment, a period of study, and then integration into his own assets. A living weapon that operated outside the laws of magic was a tool of unprecedented value. But Fairy Tail's defiance had forced his hand, and perhaps, created a better opportunity. He could not simply destroy Fairy Tail, they were too popular with the public, and a civil war between guilds and the council would create chaos, the very thing he abhorred. But he could perform a surgical strike. A demonstration of overwhelming, precise force that would humiliate Makarov, secure the asset, and remind every other guild in Fiori precisely where the true power lay. He pressed a small, almost invisible rune on the surface of his desk. Captain Liana, he said, his voice echoing faintly in the quiet room. A moment later, the doors to his office slid open. A woman entered and knelt, her armor making a soft clinking sound. Captain Liana was the pride of the Rune Knight's Enforcement Division. She was a tall, athletic woman with dark hair pulled back in a severe, practical knot. Her face was sharp, intelligent, and perpetually serious. Her custom-made armor was not the bulky plate of a standard knight, but a sleek, form-fitting suit of interlocking black metal, etched with silver runes that pulsed with a faint, contained light. This was sealing armor, designed not for defense, but for nullification. Chairman, she said, her voice crisp and disciplined. Fairy Tail has openly defied a direct order from the council, Valerius stated, his tone flat and devoid of emotion. They are harboring the unregistered entity responsible for the energy spike in the eastern forest. They have chosen anarchy over order. Liana's gaze hardened. For her, the world was a simple place of rules and consequences. The council made the rules. Those who broke them faced the consequences. Fairy Tail, with their constant property damage and flagrant disregard for authority, had long been a source of irritation. Your orders. Sir, she asked. You will take the 4th and 7th Rune Knight battalions, Valerius commanded. 200 of our finest. You will proceed to Magnolia. Your primary objective is to secure the anomaly, the one they call Naruto. Lethal force is authorized against him if he resists, but capture is preferred. He is to be brought back here, alive. He paused, letting the weight of the order settle. Your secondary objective is to enforce the council's will. You will surround the guild hall. You will allow no one to enter or leave. You will engage any mage who offers resistance. But, Captain, and here his voice dropped, becoming sharp and incisive, you are not to destroy the guild hall. You are not to cause excessive casualties among the Fairy Tail mages. This is not a war. It is a lesson. Humiliate them. Break their spirit. Show them that their chaotic bonds are no match for disciplined, organized power. Is that clear? Perfectly, Chairman, Liana replied, her eyes glinting with grim determination. She lived for such clarity of purpose. Go, Valerius said, waving a dismissive hand. Bring me my prize. Captain Liana rose, bowed sharply, and marched from the room, her footsteps the steady, rhythmic beat of impending order. Valerius turned his gaze back to the window, looking down on the perfectly grid streets of Erza. Soon, the last, most chaotic piece on the board would be brought into line. The atmosphere in the Fairy Tail Guild Hall was electric. The messenger's threat had not cowed them, it had ignited them. The usual chaos was still present, but now it was underscored by a tense, defiant energy. Mages were sharpening weapons, checking lacrima charges, and gathering in tight, determined groups. They were a family, and a threat against one, even a brand new one, was a threat against all. Naruto stood near the central hearth, feeling like the eye of a storm. Every member of the guild had, in their own way, shown him their support. The big, white-haired man who called himself Elfman had flexed and told him that surrendering was not manly. A blue-haired woman named Levi had brought him a stack of books on Fiori history, so you'll know what you're fighting for. Kana, the heavy-drinking woman he'd spoken to earlier, had simply raised her barrel of ale and given him a fierce grin. He wasn't just a guest anymore. He was one of them. The realization was both heartwarming and deeply troubling. He had dragged them into his mess. Makarov stood on a table, his small frame commanding the attention of the entire hall. "Listen up, you brats," he yelled, his voice silencing the room. "The council is coming. They think because they have laws and uniforms, they can take one of our own. They think they can march into our home and dictate terms to us." A low growl of anger rumbled through the crowd. "They have forgotten who we are." Makarov continued, his voice rising with passion. "We are mages of fairy tale. We are messy. We are loud. We destroy things. But we never, ever turn our backs on family. Let them come. Let them see what happens when you try to break a bond of fairy tale." A thunderous, deafening roar of approval shook the very foundations of the building. It was a war cry. Naruto watched, a knot tightening in his stomach. This was his fault. These people were about to fight a war with their own government for him. He couldn't let that happen. He walked toward the table where Makarov stood, pushing through the crowd. Erza, Gray, Lucy, and Natsu, who had since been revived by a bucket of water and was now nursing a massive headache and an even bigger grudge, saw him coming and fell silent. "Master Makarov," Naruto said, his voice cutting through the din. The guild quieted, turning to listen. "You don't have to do this. This is my fight. I'll face them myself." "I won't let you." "Quiet, boy," Makarov interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. He looked down at Naruto, his old eyes soft. "You still don't understand, do you? The moment you stood up to protect Erza, the moment I offered you a place here, this stopped being your fight. It became our fight. That's what it means to be in a guild. That's what it means to be family." He gestured around the hall, at the faces of every mage, all of them watching Naruto with unwavering resolve. "Look around. Do these look like the faces of people who are being forced into a battle? No. They are choosing to stand with you. To deny them that choice, that would be the greatest insult of all." Naruto looked at their faces. He saw Laxus Dreyer, the master's powerful, lightning-wielding grandson, leaning against a pillar with a smirk, a silent challenge in his eyes. He saw Mira Jane Strauss, the beautiful, white-haired barmaid, her usual sweet smile replaced by a look of cold, dangerous determination. He saw Erza, who simply met his gaze and nodded once, a promise of steel and solidarity. They weren't afraid. They were ready. He was overwhelmed. In his world, he was special. The child of prophecy. The Jinchuriki. The hero. He was always the one who had to bear the burden. But here they were demanding to share it. A slow smile spread across Naruto's face, a real one this time, full of relief and a fierce, newfound loyalty. "All right," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "Okay. Then let's show them what a family can do." The cheer that erupted this time was even louder. Just then, the ground trembled. A deep, rhythmic thudding began to echo from outside, the sound of hundreds of armored feet marching in perfect unison. They were here. The guild members poured out into the streets of Magnolia. The sun was high in the sky, casting sharp shadows. The scene was a stark contrast of chaos and order. On one side stood the mages of fairy tale, a motley, disorganized collection of individuals, bristling with defiant energy. On the other, arrayed in perfect, disciplined ranks, were 200 rune knights, their black armor gleaming, their faces hidden behind impersonal helmets. They had formed a perfect cordon, sealing off the entire street, their spears held at the ready. Civilians had long since fled, leaving the street a silent, tense no-man's land. At the very front of the formation, her presence a focal point of cold authority, was Captain Liana. She stood alone, her arms crossed, her eyes scanning the crowd of mages with disdain. Makarov Dreyer, she called out, her voice amplified by a communication lacrima, clear and sharp as breaking glass. You have one final chance. Surrender the anomaly. Disperse your mages. No one needs to be harmed. Go home, Liana, Makarov called back, his voice just as loud. My children are not for sale. Liana's jaw tightened. So be it. She raised her hand. Objective is the blonde male, designated Naruto. Subdue and capture. Engage all hostile mages. 4th Battalion, advance. The front line of 100 rune knights raised their shields and began to march forward, a wall of black steel and disciplined intent. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, their footsteps a single, intimidating drumbeat. The battle began. It was not the wild, destructive brawl the council expected. Makarov had given a single, crucial order before they'd come outside: protect the town. Protect the civilians. Draw them in. We fight on our terms. Natsu, Gray, and Gajeel, the guild's frontline brawlers, met the initial charge. But they didn't just rush forward. Gray slammed his palms on the ground, creating a massive, slick sheet of ice that sent the first rank of knights sliding and stumbling, their perfect formation breaking. Natsu unleashed targeted streams of fire, not at the knights themselves, but at their feet, forcing them to jump back and creating chaos in their ranks. From the rooftops, Alzak and Biska, the guild's sharpshooters, began picking off the knights' commanders with magic-infused bullets designed to stun, not kill. The disciplined army, so formidable as a single unit, began to fragment as their leadership was methodically dismantled. Naruto watched from the guild hall steps, standing beside Erza. He wasn't rushing in. He was observing, analyzing. He saw how the knights fought, as a unit, relying on formations and standardized tactics. They were strong together, but predictable. They're trying to isolate me, Naruto said, his eyes tracking a squad of knights that was attempting to flank the main brawl and circle toward him. Then we won't let them, Erza replied. She held up her hand, a magical circle glowing. Requip, Heaven's Will armor. In a flash of light, her clothes were replaced by a suit of magnificent silver armor with large, wing-like plates. Dozens of swords appeared in the air behind her, hovering like a swarm of angry hornets. Circle sword, she commanded. The swords shot forward, not at the knights, but into the ground in a perfect circle around the flanking squad, trapping them. The message was clear: you are not getting through. This was Naruto's first time seeing Erza's magic up close, and he was impressed by its versatility and sheer force of will. But the council had come prepared. Liana, seeing her conventional forces being outmaneuvered by Fairy Tail's chaotic but effective tactics, gave a new signal. Anti-mage squads, deploy. Target their casters. From the rear ranks, specialized squads of knights moved forward. They carried not swords, but strange, rune-etched rods. They pointed them at Levi, who was in the back, hastily writing solid script runes to create barriers. A beam of purple light shot from the rods, and her script shattered into dust. She cried out, clutching her head as a wave of feedback washed over her. These squads were targeting the very magic of the guild, causing it to short-circuit. They're disrupting the ether nano in the air. Mira Jane shouted, her takeover spell flickering. We can't maintain complex magic. This was the council's trump card. They weren't trying to overpower Fairy Tail's magic, they were trying to turn it off. The tide of the battle began to shift. The knights, no longer hampered by large-scale spells, pushed forward with brutal efficiency. Naruto knew it was his turn. He couldn't use a massive jutsu, the risk of hitting his new allies or destroying the town was too great. He needed something else. He needed a force multiplier. He brought his hands together in a familiar cross seal. Shadow Clone Jutsu. With a dozen puffs of smoke, a dozen identical Narutos appeared around him. The guild members stared in shock. Even Erza's eyes widened. The clones didn't need orders. They shared his thoughts, his purpose. They were a perfect rapid deployment force. Go! Naruto commanded. The clones exploded into action. Two of them blurred past the front lines, their movements too fast and erratic for the knights to track, and appeared beside Levi. They bodily lifted her and carried her back to the safety of the guild hall. 3 more clones engaged the anti-mage squads. They didn't use chakra attacks. They used pure, unpredictable taijutsu. The knights, trained to fight mages who stood still to cast spells, were completely unprepared for opponents who could be in 3 places at once, who attacked with a whirlwind of kicks, punches, and throws that shattered their formations and broke their lines of sight. Another 2 clones scaled the walls of the surrounding buildings, running horizontally along their surfaces. They began systematically disarming the Rune Knight snipers who had taken up positions there, using simple, non-lethal nerve strikes to incapacitate them. The remaining clones became a mobile support unit, weaving through the main battle. They weren't fighting to win, they were fighting to help. A clone would appear from nowhere to shove Gray out of the way of a surprise spear thrust. Another would throw a rock to distract a knight about to strike Natsu from behind. They were everywhere at once, a chaotic, benevolent force that completely dismantled the Rune Knight's tactical superiority. The entire battlefield had been transformed in less than a minute. Naruto hadn't thrown a single punch himself, but his strategic intervention had turned the tide back in Fairy Tail's favor. Captain Liana watched from the rear, her face a mask of cold fury. Her perfect, disciplined army was being made a fool of by a dozen copies of a single, infuriatingly cheerful blonde man. His tactics were bizarre, unorthodox, and utterly effective. He wasn't just a powerhouse, he was a commander. All units, she snarled into her lacrima, disregard the mages. Converge on the primary target. Subdue him at any cost. The strategy shifted. The knights disengaged from Natsu, Gray, and the others, and began to reform, their attention now focused solely on the original Naruto, who still stood on the guild hall steps. Erza moved to stand in front of him, her body a shield. You'll have to go through me. Naruto put a hand on her shoulder. It's okay, Erza, he said, his voice calm. They want me. Let them come. He and Erza stood back to back, a small island in a sea of advancing black armor. The knights were closing in, a tightening circle of spears and shields. Your left, Naruto said, his eyes darting back and forth. You're right, Erza replied, not missing a beat. Their movements, when the knights finally charged, were a symphony of deadly grace. Erza was a whirlwind of steel, her swords dancing, parrying, and disarming. She fought with the power and precision of a master duelist. Naruto, by contrast, was a study in minimalism. He didn't block, he redirected. He didn't strike, he unbalanced. An armored knight would lunge, and with a simple twist of his body and a light push, Naruto would send him spinning into 2 of his comrades. They were a perfect pairing, she was the unstoppable force, he was the immovable object. Their unspoken chemistry, the way they moved to cover each other's blind spots without a single word, was unnerving to behold. But Liana was not a common soldier. She saw her opening. While all eyes were on the spectacle of the 2 warriors, she moved. Her sealing armor flared with power as she activated its primary function. She blurred forward, her speed rivaling Naruto's own, not toward Naruto, but toward Erza. She didn't attack. She simply slammed her palm onto the back of Erza's Heaven's Will armor. The silver runes on Liana's armor glowed intensely. Erza cried out, not in pain, but in shock. The magical light of her armor flickered and died. The dozens of swords hovering in the air clattered uselessly to the ground. Her armor dissolved into particles of light, leaving her in her standard, non-magical chestplate and skirt. My requip, it's sealed. Erza gasped, stumbling. My armor doesn't just disrupt magic, Titania, Liana said, a cold smile on her face. It severs a mage's connection to their own power source. You are useless now. She had created the opening she needed. Naruto's focus was, for a split second, on Erza's plight. And in that split second, Liana struck. She spun, a rune-etched blade appearing in her hand, and lunged at the now unprotected Naruto. She was fast. Faster than any normal human. But Naruto wasn't normal. His eyes, which had been a clear blue, suddenly shifted. The pupils elongated into horizontal slits, and a bright orange pigment flared around his eyes. He had entered Sage mode in an instant. To Liana, it was like the world had stopped. One moment, her blade was inches from his neck. The next, he was gone. She felt a presence behind her. She tried to turn, but a hand gently clamped down on her wrist, and another rested on her shoulder. She was frozen, held in place with an effortless, absolute strength. That wasn't a very nice move, Naruto's voice whispered in her ear. It was no longer just cheerful. It was low, ancient, and held the weight of the natural world itself. The buzzing energy of the atmosphere seemed to bow to his presence. Liana's blood ran cold. She was a master of anti-mage combat, the council's finest. She had never, in her entire career, been so utterly and completely outclassed. Her speed, her strength, her special armor, all of it was irrelevant. He spun her around to face him. He still hadn't hurt her. He simply held her blade, his fingers wrapped around the razor-sharp edge without so much as a scratch. You fight for order, right? Naruto asked, his sage eyes looking not at her, but through her. You follow the rules. You believe that's how you protect people. Liana stared, speechless. I know people like you, he continued, his voice calm and reasonable, a stark contrast to the battle raging around them. They're good soldiers. They believe in the mission. But sometimes, the mission is wrong. Sometimes, the orders are wrong. Justice isn't about following rules. It's about protecting people. Your chairman, he doesn't want to protect anyone. He wants to control them. There's a difference. His words, spoken with a charisma that was as much a weapon as his Rasengan, struck a chord deep within her. He wasn't fighting her. He was teaching her. He hadn't defeated her with power, he had disarmed her with a truth she had long suspected but never dared to admit. He gently took the sword from her nerveless fingers and tossed it aside. Go home, Captain. Tell your chairman you were outmaneuvered. Tell him Fairy Tail is stronger than he thinks. He released her. Liana stumbled back, her mind reeling. She looked at her knights, being systematically and non-lethally dismantled by Naruto's clones and the reinvigorated Fairy Tail mages. She looked at Erza, who was now standing protectively beside Naruto, her magic sealed but her will unbroken. She looked at Naruto, who was offering her not a final blow, but mercy. An exit. Her ironclad discipline, her black and white view of the world, fractured. All units, she commanded, her voice strained. Tactical retreat. We are outmaneuvered. Retreat. The Rune Knights, confused but obedient, disengaged and began to fall back, carrying their stunned and incapacitated comrades with them. Within minutes, the street was empty again, save for the victorious, bruised, and utterly jubilant mages of Fairy Tail. A wild cheer went up. They had faced the full might of the council's elite and had won. Erza looked at Naruto, who had dropped out of sage mode, his eyes returning to their normal blue. He had shown mercy when he could have shown overwhelming force. He had won a political battle with strategy and an ideological one with a conversation. Her admiration for him, which had been a growing spark, now burned as bright and as hot as Natsu's flames. It was something deeper, something more profound. Naruto gave her a weary but triumphant grin. See? Told you we'd be okay. But as he looked past her, toward the retreating form of Captain Liana, his smile faded. He had won the battle, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the war was just beginning. Valerius would not take this humiliation lightly. And he was not the kind of man to make the same mistake twice. Chapter 4, Echoes of the Past. The week following the council's failed assault was one of strange, celebratory peace. Magnolia, a town well acquainted with fairy tales' antics, treated the skirmish less like an act of insurrection and more like a particularly rowdy festival. The guild hall was louder than ever, the victory infusing every brawl and drinking song with a fresh dose of defiant pride. Naruto, the catalyst for the entire affair, was no longer a guest. He was a hero, a brother. He was plied with food, challenged to endless, and brief, spars, and pulled into the guild's chaotic embrace with an enthusiasm that left him both exhausted and deeply contented. He spent his days learning. Levi, a fountain of knowledge, became his personal tutor, patiently explaining the intricacies of ether nano, the different types of magic, the geography of Fiori, and the tumultuous history of the guilds. He absorbed it all with the focus of a shinobi learning a new jutsu, building a mental map of this new world. He was still lost, but he was no longer blind. But it was the quiet moments he cherished most. The late evenings on the guild balcony with Erza, sharing a slice of cake and a comfortable silence that spoke more than words ever could. Their conversations rarely touched on battle or strategy. They spoke of small things, the taste of different foods, the beauty of the sunset over the canal, the funny habits of their guildmates. He learned that her stern demeanor hid a surprisingly soft heart and a fierce, almost childlike love for sweets. She learned that his boisterous confidence concealed a profound, observant gentleness. He saw the way the armor she wore around her heart was beginning to crack. She smiled more, laughed more freely. When he was near, the rigid posture of Titania, the S-class knight, would soften into the more relaxed stance of just Erza. And he, in turn, found the constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had been his companion since arriving in this world fading into the background. The crushing weight of being the hero, the savior, the last hope, was lifted. Here, he was just Naruto. And for the first time since the war had ended, he felt like that was enough. The job request was tacked to the board like any other. It was written in a shaky, desperate hand on a crumpled piece of parchment. It spoke of a strange affliction in a small, remote village to the north called Oakhaven. The pay was modest, the details vague. It mentioned a haunting sickness of the heart. Most of the guild's top mages, hungry for a real challenge after the scrap with the Rune Knights, passed it over in favor of more exciting quests involving rampaging monsters or treasure hunts. But Lucy Heartfilia, her compassionate heart unable to ignore the plea, took the request. Team Natsu, herself, Natsu, Gray, and Erza, was officially on the case. A haunting? Natsu scoffed as they prepared to leave. Probably just a gas leak. I'll burn it out. This'll be easy. Naruto, who had been listening from a nearby table, felt a strange prickle on his skin. He closed his eyes, extending his senses. He couldn't feel chakra signatures here, but he was learning to read the ambient flow of ether nano. And from the distant north, he felt a subtle wrongness. It wasn't the loud, malevolent power of the grave phantom. It was a quiet corruption, a dissonant chord in the world's natural harmony. It was cold, insidious, and felt hollow. I'm coming with you, he said, standing up. Erza turned to him, surprised. Naruto. It's just a minor job. You should rest. You've done enough. It's not a normal job, he said, his expression serious. There's something wrong with the energy in that village. I can feel it. His sage abilities, even in this foreign world, gave him a perception that no one else had. Natsu grinned. See. He smells a real fight. The more the merrier. Erza studied Naruto's face. She saw no excitement, only a deep, unsettling gravity. She trusted his instincts. They had already saved her once. "All right," she nodded. "You can come. But stay close. We don't know what we're walking into." The journey to Oakhaven took the better part of a day. The village was nestled deep in a valley, surrounded by ancient, moss-covered oak trees. It should have been idyllic. It was unnervingly silent. No children played in a single dusty street. No smoke rose from the chimneys. The doors and windows of the small, timber-framed houses were all shut tight, as if the entire village was hiding from an unseen threat. The air was cold, far colder than the sunny weather would suggest, and carried a faint, cloying scent of withered flowers and regret. The village elder, a stooped, terrified man named Elias, met them at the entrance. His eyes were wide with fear and sleeplessness. "Thank the heavens, mages," he rasped, his voice trembling. "You must help us. It started 3 nights ago. The echoes, they came back." "Echoes?" Lucy asked, her notepad and pen already out. "The lost ones," Elias whispered, gesturing to the silent houses. Everyone we've ever lost. A wife, a son, a brother. They appear in our homes at night. They look real, they sound real. They whisper things we always wished we could hear. I forgive you. I'm proud of you. I love you." Gray frowned. "That doesn't sound so bad. A little creepy, maybe." The elder's face contorted in anguish. "That's how it starts. They draw you in, feed on your hope. But then, they change. The love turns to blame. The forgiveness to accusation. And then, they attack. They don't have bodies, but the cold they bring, it drains the life from you. Several of our people are already in a stupor, barely breathing. It's a plague of sorrow, and it's killing us." Naruto's senses were screaming now. He entered sage mode, the orange pigment flaring around his eyes. The world shifted. He could see it now. A thin, grayish-purple miasma clung to the village like a shroud. It was made of negative emotions, grief, guilt, regret. And it all seemed to emanate from a central point somewhere in the village square. This wasn't magic as they knew it. This was something else. Something parasitic. "We'll handle it," Erza said, her voice a firm, reassuring anchor in the sea of fear. "We'll stay until nightfall and face these echoes ourselves." They set up in the village's empty town hall as dusk began to bleed across the sky. The temperature plummeted. The oppressive silence deepened. Natsu tried to light a fire, but the flames sputtered and died, producing no warmth. As the last of the light vanished, it began. A faint, spectral figure shimmered into existence in the corner of the room. It was an old woman, her form translucent and glowing with a faint, sorrowful blue light. Lucy gasped, recognizing her from a picture in the elder's home. "That's his wife, she died last spring." The echo of the old woman looked at them, her expression one of gentle sadness. She didn't speak. She just watched. Then, another appeared. A young boy, chasing a spectral ball. Then a man in a farmer's hat. Soon, the room was filled with them, dozens of silent, sorrowful ghosts, each one a lost loved one from the village. They didn't threaten. They just mourned. "What is this?" Gray muttered, unnerved. "Are they ghosts?" "No," Naruto said, his sage mode active, his voice low. "They're not souls. They're constructs. Empty puppets. They're made of this world's energy, but it's been twisted, corrupted." He could feel them feeding, not on warmth or life, but on the emotions in the room, the fear from Lucy, the frustration from Natsu, the guarded sorrow from Gray. And then, they turned their attention to the two strongest emotional beacons in the room. One of the echoes detached from the crowd and drifted toward Erza. Its form shifted, coalesced. The translucent blue hardened into solid color. It was a boy, no older than 11, with blue hair and a strange red tattoo over his right eye. He wore the simple, ragged clothes of a slave. He looked up at Erza, and his face was a mask of heartbreaking, soul-crushing sadness. It was Jalal. The Jalal from the Tower of Heaven. The friend she had failed, the boy she had left behind. Erza froze. Her breath hitched. The air was knocked from her lungs as if she'd been punched. The professional mask of Titania shattered, and all that was left was a woman staring at the personification of her deepest, most profound failure. Erza. The echo whispered, and the voice was perfect. It was the voice from her nightmares, the voice that haunted her quietest moments. Why did you leave me? We were supposed to escape together. You abandoned us. You abandoned me. No, Erza choked out, taking a step back. You're not real. I am as real as your guilt, the echo of Jalal said, his voice turning cold, accusatory. You ran. You saved yourself and left us to rot. All that strength, all that armor, it's built on my pain. You are strong because you were a coward. Shut up. Natsu roared, lunging forward, his fist wreathed in flame. Fire Dragon's iron fist. His fist passed right through the echo's form, which flickered like a disturbed flame but did not disperse. Natsu stumbled, his attack meeting no resistance. Physical attacks don't work. Gray shouted, slamming his hand on the floor. Ice make, prison. A cage of ice erupted around the echo, but the spectral boy simply drifted through the bars, his sorrowful eyes never leaving Erza's face. Magic is useless too. Lucy cried in alarm. The echo took another step toward Erza. You wear that armor to hide, but I can see you, Erza. I can see the scared little girl who ran away. You don't deserve to be happy. You deserve to be alone. Each word was a poison dagger, aimed with perfect precision at the most vulnerable parts of her heart. Erza was shaking, her hands clenched into fists, tears welling in her eyes. Her formidable will, which had withstood armies and demons, was crumbling against this psychological assault. At the same time, another echo had formed in front of Naruto. It was a tall man with a wild mane of white hair, red lines of paint running down from his eyes, and a kind, mischievous grin. He wore a green robe and a large scroll on his back. He was silent. He just stood there, looking at Naruto. It was Jiraiya. Naruto's heart stopped. Pervy sage. His master. His godfather. The man whose death he had felt so keenly, a hole in his life that had never truly healed. The echo of Jiraiya didn't speak. It didn't need to. It just looked at him, and its expression slowly shifted. The kind grin faded, replaced by a look of quiet, profound disappointment. It was the look a father gives a son who has failed him. The echo shook its head, a slow, sad gesture, and then began to fade, as if it couldn't bear to look at him any longer. It was 1,000 times more devastating than any accusation. The pain was a physical blow. The guilt Naruto carried, that he hadn't been there, that he hadn't been strong enough to save his master from pain, surged up, fresh and raw. The confidence, the calm, the strength he had projected since arriving here, all of it was a lie, a thin veneer over this gaping wound. He and Erza were trapped, paralyzed by their own pasts, targeted by constructs that fed on their pain. Naruto. Kurama's roar in his mindscape was a lifeline. Snap out of it. They're illusions. They're feeding on your grief. Starve them. The fox's anger cut through the fog of sorrow. Kurama was right. These things were parasites. They were using his own memories, his own heart, against him. And he was letting them. The disappointment on Jiraiya's face wasn't real. The real Jiraiya had died proud. He had died believing in his student. This was a desecration of his memory. A fire ignited in Naruto's chest, a clean, righteous anger that burned away the grief. He looked at the fading image of his master and spoke, his voice quiet but unshakable. "You're right," he said. "I wasn't there. I couldn't save you. I'll carry that regret for the rest of my life." The echo flickered, seeming to grow stronger from the admission. "But," Naruto continued, his voice hardening, "my master never looked at me with disappointment. Not once. He believed in me until his last breath. You are not him. You're just a shadow, twisting a good man's memory. And I won't let you." He closed his eyes, focusing. He pushed past his own pain, reaching out with his sage senses, not at the echoes, but at the energy that connected them to their targets. He saw it now, thin, ethereal tendrils of that sickly purple miasma, extending from the echoes and hooking directly into his and Erza's chests, siphoning their emotional turmoil. He couldn't attack the echoes. But he could sever the tethers. He turned his attention to Erza. She was on her knees now, her head bowed, as the echo of Jalal stood over her, whispering its poison. "Erza." Naruto's voice was a sharp command. She looked up, her eyes lost and full of pain. "Listen to me," he said, walking toward her, ignoring his own fading phantom. "That thing is not Jalal. It's a puppet using his face. It's feeding on your guilt. Don't fight the memory. Accept it. And then let it go." "I can't," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's right. I ran away. You survived." Naruto knelt in front of her, his blue eyes boring into hers, demanding her attention. "You survived and you got strong. You got strong so you could protect people, so no one else would have to feel the way you did. The past happened. You can't change it. But it doesn't own you. Your guilt doesn't make you weak, Erza. It's proof that you have a heart. It's the source of your strength." His words were a shield, a counter-narrative to the poison of the echo. He was not just offering comfort, he was offering a different interpretation of her own history. He was reframing her greatest shame as her greatest strength. The echo of Jalal seemed to sense the shift. "Lies," it hissed. "Don't listen to him. He can't understand your pain." "He's wrong," Naruto said, his voice soft but absolute. He reached out, not touching her, but his presence was a tangible warmth. "I do understand. We all have ghosts, Erza. People we couldn't save. Mistakes that haunt us. You can let them be an anchor that drowns you, or you can let them be the reason you learn to fly. The choice is yours." Her gaze flickered from Naruto's earnest face to the hateful, sorrowful visage of the boy she'd left behind. Naruto's words resonated with a profound truth, a truth she had been too afraid to face. Her strength did come from her pain. Her desire to protect her new family and fairy tale was born in the darkness of the Tower of Heaven. She had not run from her past, she had been forged by it. "My past doesn't define me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She looked the echo of Jalal dead in the eye. "My friends do." As she spoke, the tether of dark energy connecting her to the echo wavered. Naruto saw his chance. He formed a simple hand seal. It was a basic technique for dispelling genjutsu, designed to disrupt foreign energy. Here, he adapted it. He focused not on Erza, but on the tendril itself. "Release," he commanded. A pulse of pure, clean chakra erupted from him. It didn't harm the echo. It simply severed the connection. The spectral Jalal flickered violently, its face contorting in a silent scream as its food source was cut off. With a final, agonized hiss, it dissolved into a cloud of foul-smelling purple smoke. Erza gasped, the immense weight on her soul lifting. She looked at Naruto, who was still kneeling before her, his expression one of fierce, protective concentration. He had walked into the darkest corner of her heart and turned on a light. But they weren't done. The other echoes in the room, deprived of their primary targets, began to turn violent, their sorrowful faces twisting into masks of rage. They swarmed toward Lucy, Gray, and Natsu. They're feeding on any negative emotion now. Naruto yelled, getting to his feet. Don't be afraid. Don't get angry. Clear your minds. It was easier said than done. Natsu's answer to everything was anger. Gray's was frustration. The echoes swirled around them, their chilling touch sapping their strength and warmth. We have to find the source. Erza said, her resolve returning, steel lacing her voice. Naruto, you said you felt it in the village square. Yeah, he nodded. It's like a seed. It's pumping out this corrupt energy. Then let's go cut the root, she declared. They burst out of the town hall and ran toward the village square. The echoes swarmed after them, a river of spectral misery. Natsu tried to blast them, but his fire only passed through them. The square was dominated by a large, ancient oak tree, its branches bare and twisted like skeletal fingers. At its base, nestled amongst the roots, was a pulsating, volleyball-sized object. It was a sphere of pure, swirling darkness, a void that seemed to drink the very light around it. It was the heart of the corruption, the seed Naruto had sensed. That's it. Naruto yelled. We destroy that, and this all ends. Erza equipped into her Flame Empress armor, her sword wreathed in fire. I'll hold them off. Destroy it. She became a bulwark of flame and steel, her fiery attacks not harming the echoes, but their intense light and heat momentarily driving them back, creating a pocket of space around the tree. Naruto ran to the pulsating seed. He could feel the raw, alien wrongness coming from it. This was the same energy he'd felt from the void that brought him here, a tiny, festering piece of it. He drew his hand back, chakra gathering in his palm. A Rasengan spun to life. But as he prepared to strike, a voice echoed in his mind. It was not Kurama. It was a voice that was both melodic and dissonant, ancient and utterly alien. Why do you struggle? It asked. Emotion is a flaw. A bug in the code of existence. It creates pain, grief, regret. A pointless cycle of suffering. I offer the universe a gift. The gift of true serenity. A perfect, silent, peaceful non-existence. The voice was cold, dispassionate, the voice of a cosmic surgeon preparing to remove a tumor it called life. Naruto staggered, the telepathic intrusion a violation. Who are you? He shouted aloud. I am the cure, the voice replied. The end of pain. You, who have suffered so much, should understand. Join me. Embrace the peace of the void, the offer was seductive. A world without pain. Without loss. A part of him, the part that remembered every death, every failure, was tempted. But then he thought of Jiraiya's proud smile, of his parents' sacrifice, of Erza's tears turning to resolve. Pain was part of it. The struggle was what gave the good moments meaning. No, Naruto said, his voice a low growl. Pain lets you know you're alive. And sharing it with friends, that's what makes you strong. He ignored the alien voice and thrust his hand forward. Rasengan. The sphere of spinning chakra slammed into the dark seed. The seed convulsed, letting out a psychic shriek that lanced through Naruto's mind. It tried to absorb the Rasengan, to consume its energy, but the pure, rotational power was too much. The seed cracked, and then imploded with a flash of purple light and a wave of cold that washed over the entire village. Instantly, the miasma that had choked Oakhaven vanished. The echoes that had been swarming Erza let out one final, synchronized wail and dissolved into harmless motes of blue light, which then faded into nothing. The oppressive cold lifted. The silence was broken by the sound of a window creaking open, then another. The villagers, freed from their curse, were tentatively peering out. The long night was finally over. Back in the square, the rest of Team Natsu sagged with relief. Erza dispelled her armor, looking exhausted but resolute. She walked over to Naruto, who was staring at the spot where the seed had been, his expression grim. "It's over," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did it." "It's not over," he said quietly. "That thing, it was just a piece of something much bigger. Something not from this world. It spoke to me." He told them what the voice had said, its chilling philosophy of true serenity. Lucy turned pale. Gray's expression was grim. Even Natsu, for once, was silent, sensing the scale of the threat. They had not just defeated a curse, they had made contact with a cosmic horror. Later, as they prepared to leave the grateful village, Erza found Naruto sitting alone on a hill overlooking Oakhaven as the sun rose, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. She sat beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice soft. "What you said, back there, no one has ever understood. I've always thought my past was a weakness I had to hide, a burden I had to carry alone. It's not," he said, turning to look at her. The morning light caught in his blonde hair, making it look like a halo. "It's the heaviest stone in your foundation. It's what makes you unshakable." She looked at him, at the genuine warmth and understanding in his eyes. The last of her armor, the deepest, most fortified wall around her heart, didn't just crack. It crumbled into dust. She leaned in, and before she could second-guess herself, before the moment could pass, she pressed a soft, hesitant kiss to his cheek. It was a small, chaste gesture, but it was laden with a world of unspoken gratitude, admiration, and a burgeoning affection that both terrified and thrilled her. She pulled back, her face burning, unable to meet his eyes. "For what you did," she stammered. For everything." Naruto slowly raised a hand to his cheek, his own face a mask of stunned surprise. A slow, goofy, brilliant grin spread across his face. "Oh," he said. "Right. You're welcome." In that moment, under the dawn of a new day, surrounded by a world they had just saved, something new and fragile and beautiful began to bloom between them, a small flower of hope growing in the shadow of an immense and encroaching darkness. Chapter 5, A Requiem for a Night. The news of Fairy Tale's victory over the Rune Knight spread through Fiore like a wildfire, carried by hushed whispers and exaggerated tavern tales. But within the pristine, silent halls of the Magic Council, the mood was not one of grudging respect. It was one of cold, simmering fury. Chairman Valerius stood before the full assembly of the 10 council members. The chamber was a grand, sterile amphitheater, all white marble and polished silver, designed to intimidate. The other 9 members, old men and women from powerful, established families, were in an uproar. "This is an outrage. An act of open rebellion," shouted a portly councilman named Ord. "Makarov has gone too far. He spits on our authority," another agreed. "And this Naruto anomaly," a stern-faced woman added, "Captain Liana's report is disturbing. A power that negates magic. An army of duplicates. Unacceptable. He must be classified as a threat on par with Zeref himself." Valerius let them vent. He listened to their blustering, their fear, their predictable calls for sanctions and war. They were politicians, not strategists. They saw a nail sticking up and their only solution was a bigger hammer. He had already tried a hammer, and it had been deftly turned against him. He waited for the noise to die down, then spoke, his voice quiet but cutting through the chamber like a shard of ice. "War is messy. It creates chaos and disorder. It turns the public against us. We would win, eventually, but the cost would be a damaged, unstable Fiore. An unacceptable outcome." He paused, letting his logic sink in. "We do not need to destroy Fairy Tale. We need to decapitate it. We need to remove the pieces that grant them their strength, and we need to secure the asset. And we need to do it in a way that frames us as the saviors, not the aggressors." His eyes, cold and calculating, swept across the chamber. He already had a plan. A dark, forbidden plan he had held in reserve for a true crisis. The anomaly's arrival was that crisis. And that opportunity. In the council's deepest vaults, Valerius began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone, lies a relic from the age of the first magic wars. An autonomous weapon created to be the ultimate anti-mage solution. It was deemed too dangerous, too indiscriminate, and was sealed away a century ago. It is called, the Aegis. A murmur of shock and recognition went through the council. The Aegis was a myth, a boogeyman story used to frighten young mages. The Aegis is an automaton with a singular purpose, Valerius explained. It absorbs ether nano. All ether nano. From the atmosphere, from magical items, and directly from the bodies of mages. It uses this stolen power to fuel itself, becoming stronger with every spell cast against it. It cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be stopped by conventional magic. Its release would be a catastrophe. You can't be suggesting we unleash that thing. Councilwoman Belno gasped, her face pale. Of course not, Valerius said smoothly, a predatory gleam in his eye. But accidents happen. A catastrophic failure in the ancient sealing runes. A tragic, unforeseen event. An ancient monster, released. Upon the world, heading directly for the largest nearby concentration of magical power, the town of Magnolia. He let the implication hang in the air. Imagine the scenario. A mindless, world-ending threat that the council's own forces are powerless to stop. The guilds are overwhelmed. Hope is lost. And then, who stands as the last line of defense? Fairy Tale's strongest knight, Titania. And our mysterious anomaly. We will watch. We will record. We will see exactly what this Naruto is capable of when pushed to his absolute limit. And when the battle is over, one way or another, we will step in to clean up the mess and take possession of whatever, or whoever, is left. It was a monstrous, cynical plan. It used an ancient terror as a probe and gambled with thousands of innocent lives simply to test and capture a single target. It was politically brilliant. The council would be blameless, seen as victims of the same tragedy. Fairy Tale would be weakened, and he would have his weapon. The council members looked at each other, their initial shock giving way to a grudging, fearful admiration for Valerius's ruthlessness. With a series of reluctant, intimidated nods, they gave their assent. The motion was passed. Valerius returned to his office, a thin, cruel smile on his lips. He activated a hidden panel on his desk, revealing a single, large, blood-red lacrima. He placed his hand upon it. Authorization code, Valerius Omega 0. Disengage primary containment seals on asset, Aegis. Set preliminary target designation, Magnolia. Deep beneath the council citadel, in a vault lined with 1,000 layers of sealing spells, something stirred. A pair of cold, blue, artificial lights flickered to life in the oppressive darkness. In Magnolia, life went on. Naruto was sparring with Natsu and Gray in the woods outside of town, a now daily ritual. It was less of a fight and more of a frantic game of tag. Hold still so I can punch you. Natsu roared, sending a wave of fire that Naruto sidestepped with a lazy grin. You're too slow, flame brain. Gray taunted, launching a volley of ice lances that Naruto weaved through without breaking a sweat. Naruto laughed, easily dodging their combined assault. You guys have to work on your teamwork. You're just getting in each other's way. He was teaching them. Under the guise of a three-way brawl, he was forcing them to think, to coordinate, to anticipate. They were getting faster, smarter. He suddenly froze. His sage mode wasn't active, but he didn't need it. A wave of profound, unnatural wrongness washed over the entire region. It was a pressure drop in the magical atmosphere, a sudden, voracious hunger that made the air itself feel thin and cold. Every mage in Fiori felt it, a sudden, inexplicable weakness, as if their inner fire had been dampened. In the fairy tale guild hall, drinks were spilled as a collective shiver ran through the mages. Makarov, standing on the bar, dropped his mug, his face paling. What is that? Erza, who had been enjoying a quiet slice of cake, shot to her feet, her hand instinctively going to where her sword would be. The feeling was horrifying, a vast, empty void that was pulling at the very edges of her own magical power. Naruto, Natsu, and Gray stopped their spar, looking toward the east. What was that? Gray asked, rubbing his arms. Felt like all the warmth just got sucked out of the world. Natsu, a being of fire and heat, looked particularly ill. My fire, it feels weak. Naruto's eyes were narrowed, his senses stretched to their limit. It's a vacuum, he said, his voice grim. Something is sucking up all the energy in the air. All the ether nano. As he spoke, a high-pitched alarm began to shriek from the guild hall, a magical early warning system reserved for S-class threats and above. A moment later, a massive projection appeared in the sky over Magnolia, a magical alert from the council itself. It showed a map of Fiori, with a single, massive, skull-shaped icon moving steadily from the east. A panicked voice, broadcast from the council, echoed across the town. Emergency alert. This is not a drill. An ancient automaton of unknown origin, designated Aegis, has breached containment. The entity is absorbing all ether nano in its path. All mages are advised, do not engage. Your magic will only make it stronger. Repeat, do not. The broadcast cut out into static as the Aegis presumably drained the power from the communication lacrima. Panic erupted in the streets of Magnolia. People began to scream and run. The guild members rushed out of the hall, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. They could all feel it now, a creeping weakness, a drain on their very life force. Makarov, what are we going to do? Mira Jane asked, her usual calm strained. We can't fight it with magic. Makarov looked toward the east, his expression grim. This was a foe unlike any they had ever faced. A foe that fed on their very essence. Erza stood at the front of the crowd, her face a mask of iron resolve. She was the guild's first line of defense. Their shield. I will intercept it, she said, her voice ringing with authority. I'll hold it back. The rest of you, get the townspeople to safety. Evacuate everyone. Erza, you can't. Lucy cried. Your equip is magic. It will just feed it. My armor is not just magic, Erza countered, her gaze unwavering. It is steel. My will is not magic. It is my own. I will buy you time. Before anyone could argue, she requipped into her heart cruise armor, her standard battle gear, and shot off toward the east like a silver comet. Naruto, Natsu, and Gray arrived back at the guild hall just in time to see her disappear over the horizon. Erza, wait. Natsu yelled, but she was already gone. Damn it. Naruto cursed. He knew what she was doing. She was planning to sacrifice herself, to throw her own body in the path of the monster to buy a few precious minutes. The same stubborn, noble self-sacrifice he'd seen in the forest. I'm going after her, he said. We're all going. Natsu declared, fire returning to his fists despite the oppressive, draining aura. No, Makarov said, his voice stopping them in their tracks. Erza was right. Your job is here. Help with the evacuation. Protect the people. Naruto, he said, turning to him, his ancient eyes deadly serious. You're the only one whose power doesn't come from ether nano. You're the only one who can fight this thing. Go. Help her. Naruto didn't need to be told twice. He nodded once to the master, then took off, his speed a yellow blur that kicked up a cloud of dust. He pushed himself harder than he had since arriving, his heart pounding with a cold, rising dread. Erza met the Aegis in a wide, open plain 5 miles east of Magnolia. The automaton was a terrifying sight. It was 20 feet tall, a hulking behemoth of black, unknown metal and pulsing blue conduits. It had no face, only a single, glowing blue optic that swept across the landscape, analyzing and consuming. It walked with a slow, ponderous, unstoppable gait, and the land around it was gray and withered, every drop of magical energy sucked from the soil and plant life. She stood in its path, her sword drawn. The air around her was so thin on ether nano that she felt lightheaded, but her will was a fortress. "You will go no further," she declared. The Aegis did not respond. Its single blue eye fixed on her, identifying her as a concentration of magical energy. A port on its shoulder slid open, and a cannon formed, gathering the ambient energy it had absorbed. Erza's eyes widened. Requip, adamantine armor. In a flash of light, she was encased in a massive, shield-like suit of armor known for its ultimate defense. She braced herself just as the Aegis fired a beam of pure, concussive force. The impact was cataclysmic. The beam slammed into her shields, and the sound was like the cracking of a mountain. The adamantine armor, which had withstood a blast from the Phantom Lord's Jupiter cannon, groaned and fractured under the immense, non-magical force. The shield shattered, and Erza was thrown back hundreds of feet, her armor dissolving into light as she tumbled through the air. She crashed to the ground, bruised and battered, but she was on her feet in an instant. The Aegis hadn't even slowed. She requipped again. Heaven's will armor. Dozens of swords appeared around her. Blumenblatt. She launched herself at the automaton, her swords swirling around her in a deadly dance of steel. The swords rained down on the Aegis, but they screeched and scraped against its alien metal hide, leaving only faint scratches. In response, the Aegis's surface rippled, and a dozen metallic tentacles shot out, swatting her swords from the air and wrapping around her limbs. It was draining her magic directly. She felt her power being siphoned away, her armor flickering and threatening to dispel. With a cry of sheer effort, she flexed, shattering the tentacles with pure physical strength, and leaped back. The battle was a brutal, one-sided affair. Erza threw everything she had at the monster. She used her Flame Empress armor, but its fire was absorbed, powering the automaton further. She used her Sea Empress armor, but its water attacks were useless. She tried her giant armor, using the Demolivo lance in a powerful throw, but the spear simply bounced off the Aegis's chest. Armor after armor, strategy after strategy, was broken against the automaton's implacable defense and overwhelming power. It was adapting, analyzing her requips and developing countermeasures in real time. Each spell she cast, each armor she summoned, only made it stronger. She was left in her standard Heart Cruise armor, breathing heavily, her body a canvas of cuts and bruises. Her magical reserves were almost completely depleted, drained by the Aegis's passive aura and her own desperate attacks. All she had left was a single sword and her own indomitable will. The Aegis, its blue eye glowing brighter now, supercharged by all the magic it had absorbed from her, lumbered toward her. Its hand transformed into a massive, multi-bladed drill, spinning with a horrifying whine. This was it. The final blow. Erza gritted her teeth, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. She raised her sword in a final, defiant guard. She thought of her friends, of the guild, of the laughing, kind-hearted blonde boy who had shown her she didn't have to be alone. If her death could buy them even 30 more seconds, it would be a death well spent. "I'm sorry, Naruto," she thought. The drill lunged. It never connected. A blur of yellow and black slammed into the Aegis from the side with the force of a meteor. There was a deafening boom of displaced air, and the 20-foot, multi-ton automaton was lifted off its feet and sent flying, crashing into the ground 100 yards away. Naruto landed lightly between Erza and the downed machine, his back to her. He didn't look at her. His entire focus was on the enemy. His body was practically vibrating with a furious, contained energy. Naruto. Erza breathed, her knees threatening to buckle with relief and shock. He turned his head slightly, and she saw his eyes. They were no longer the cheerful blue she knew. They were glowing, slitted, and red. Kurama's power was bleeding through, a sign of his immense, unrestrained fury. "Get back," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl she had never heard before. "Go. Now." The Aegis pushed itself back to its feet, its metal hide dented from the impact. Its single blue eye swiveled and fixed on Naruto. It registered a power signature unlike anything in its databanks. It was not Ether Nano. It was something else. Something vast, ancient, and powerful. A primary threat. Erza, however, was a knight of fairy tale. She didn't run. "I can still fight," she yelled, taking a step forward. "No, you can't," Naruto said, his voice cold and hard. "You're hurt. And you're in the way." The words were harsh, brutal, but they were born not of malice, but of a desperate, terrifying fear for her safety. The sight of her, battered and broken, standing on the brink of death, it had ignited a protective rage in him that eclipsed anything he'd felt during the war. He had failed to save his master. He had failed to save Niji. He would not fail to save her. He didn't give her a choice. A burst of chakra, invisible and unfelt by her, erupted from him, a gentle but firm shockwave that pushed her back, forcing her to stumble away from the battlefield. Then, he turned his full attention to the Aegis. And he let go. The world went silent. The oppressive, draining aura of the Aegis was suddenly irrelevant, a candle flame in the face of a supernova. A column of brilliant, golden energy erupted from Naruto, soaring into the heavens. It was not Ether Nano. It was not Kurama's demonic red chakra. It was a divine, transcendent power that seemed to bend light and space around it. His blonde hair stood on end, glowing with its own inner light. His skin took on a golden sheen. The tattered remains of his black undershirt disintegrated, revealing the intricate black markings that covered his torso and arms. 9 black, tomo-like marks appeared on his back, forming a circle around the Uzumaki clan symbol. And behind him, 9 black spheres, composed of a substance that seemed to be the absence of everything, materialized from nothingness, hovering silently. He had entered 6 paths sage mode. Erza stared, her mind unable to comprehend what she was seeing. The power rolling off him was not just strong, it was absolute. It felt like standing in the presence of a god. It was a power that didn't just exist in the world, it imposed its own reality upon it. Even Valerius, watching through a high-altitude reconnaissance lacrima from his office in Erza, leaned forward, his calm facade finally breaking. His jaw was slack with disbelief. What is that?" he whispered. The Aegis, a mindless automaton, for the first time registered a threat that exceeded its operational parameters. It instinctively fired its main cannon, a beam of energy supercharged by all of Erza's stolen magic. Naruto didn't even look at it. He raised one hand. One of the black spheres, a truth-seeking orb, shot forward and intercepted the beam. There was no explosion. The orb simply touched the beam, and the attack was unmade, erased from existence as if it had never been fired. Naruto vanished. He appeared directly in front of the Aegis, his golden form a stark contrast to the automaton's black metal. He didn't punch. He didn't kick. He simply touched its chest with his open palm. Another truth-seeking orb flowed from his back, down his arm, and merged with his hand. He channeled his will into it, using the yin-yang release that was the basis of all creation. He wasn't attacking the Aegis. He was rewriting its existence. "Disappear," he commanded. The black metal of the Aegis began to flake. Away, turning to dust. Not breaking, not melting, but simply ceasing to be. The automaton let out a series of electronic shrieks, its systems failing as its very matter was unraveled. It swung its arms wildly, but Naruto was no longer there. He hovered a few feet away, his arms crossed, watching with cold, divine indifference. In less than 10 seconds, the Aegis, the ancient, unstoppable weapon that had broken the might of Titania, was reduced to a pile of inert gray dust that was scattered by the wind. The silence that followed was absolute. Naruto floated back down to the ground, the immense golden aura receding, folding back into him. The truth-seeking orbs vanished. He was still Naruto, but he felt different, older, his presence carrying the weight of the cosmos. He walked over to Erza, who was still staring in stunned silence, her sword having long since slipped from her fingers. He stopped in front of her. Her heart crew's armor was in ruins, the chest plate cracked, pieces of it falling away. She was covered in dirt and blood, her scarlet hair a tangled mess. She looked defeated. She looked vulnerable. And she had never looked more beautiful to him. She braced herself, expecting a lecture, a reprimand for her recklessness. Instead, he gently reached out and his fingers brushed against the cracked metal of her chest plate. His touch was warm, impossibly so. "You don't need to wear that armor for me," he said, his voice soft, the terrifying growl gone, replaced by a deep, aching tenderness. It was not a strategic observation. It was not a comment on her fighting style. It was a confession. A promise. An admission that he saw past the steel, past the titles, past the strength, to the woman beneath. It was the most intimate thing anyone had ever said to her. Her armor, the physical manifestation of the walls around her heart, had been broken by the Aegis. But her heart itself, the thing she had guarded so fiercely for so long, was shattered by his words. Tears, not of pain or failure, but of a profound, overwhelming emotional release, welled in her eyes. The last of her defenses crumbled. The brave face of Titania fell away completely. And for the first time since she was a child in the Tower of Heaven, she allowed herself to be weak. Her legs finally gave out. But before she could fall, he was there, catching her, his arms wrapping around her in a firm, steady embrace. She buried her face in his shoulder, her body shaking with silent, cathartic sobs, the last of her broken armor clattering to the ground around them. He just held her, his hand gently stroking her hair, his own divine power a warm, protective cloak. He had just unmade a god-killer, but in this moment, holding her, he had never felt more human. Their long, unspoken dance was over. The sun had finally broken through the scarlet night's dawn. And from his distant perch, Valerius watched, his awe turning into a new, far more terrifying emotion, pure, unadulterated greed. He had not found a weapon. He had found a god. And he would have it. Chapter 6, The Unveiling of Maelstrom. The aftermath of the Aegis's destruction was a deafening silence that spread across Fiori. The reconnaissance lacrima, which had broadcasted the impossible event to Valerius's office, had also been patched into the Magic Council's central monitoring chamber. The technicians and analysts who had tracked the automaton's destructive path watched, jaws agape, as a literal god in human form unmade their ultimate weapon. The recording was immediately classified at the highest level, but whispers, like frightened mice, began to scurry through the corridors of power. In Magnolia, the oppressive, energy-draining aura vanished in an instant. The mages of Fairy Tale, who had been struggling to organize the panicked evacuation, felt the life return to their magic. A collective cheer went up, a wave of relief so powerful it was a physical force. But their celebration was cut short by a new, dawning question: what in the world had just happened? Naruto arrived back at the guild hall, carrying Erza. She had cried herself into an exhausted sleep in his arms, her body finally succumbing to its injuries now that the adrenaline was gone. He walked through the crowd of his guildmates, his expression a grim mask. The divine power was hidden again, but a new, heavy gravity clung to him. He was no longer just the cheerful, powerful stranger. He was something else entirely. Something ancient and terrifying. He carried Erza to the infirmary, laying her gently on a bed. Poorly Yusuka was there in an instant, her usual grumbling replaced by a rare, focused silence as she took in the extent of Erza's injuries. Broken ribs, severe magical exhaustion, deep tissue bruising. This was not a normal fight, Poorly Yusuka stated, her sharp eyes flicking to Naruto. "What did you do?" "I ended it," Naruto said, his voice flat. He turned and walked out, leaving the healer to her work. He found Makarov on the second-floor balcony, staring out at the horizon with troubled eyes. The old master didn't turn as Naruto approached. "The power you just used," Makarov said quietly. "That was not chakra as you described it. That was something else. It felt like the birth of a star." "It's the power I used to end the war in my world," Naruto admitted, leaning against the railing. He felt hollowed out, not from energy expenditure, but from the emotional toll of unleashing that power again. He had hated it then, and he hated it now. It felt like a violation of the natural order. "It's the power of a god. And I never wanted to use it again." Makarov was silent for a long time. "A god," he repeated, the word hanging heavy in the air. "And Valerius saw it all. I can feel his greedy eyes on us even from here. He will not rest now. He won't send knights next time. He will send armies. Or worse." The old master was right. He had revealed his trump card. The game had changed, and the stakes had just been raised to a level he couldn't begin to comprehend. But the world, it seemed, had other plans. It didn't wait for Valerius to make the next move. It began 2 days later. The sky over Harjan, a major port city on Fiore's southern coast, began to change. It started at dusk. The setting sun was suddenly blotted out not by clouds, but by a beautiful, terrifying aurora of shimmering, violet-black light. It was not the angry, violent purple of a storm, but a deep, silent, mesmerizing violet, laced with veins of pure black that seemed to drink the stars. It was eerily beautiful, like a bruise on the face of heaven. The citizens of Harjan gathered in the streets, looking up in awe and confusion. There was no sound, no wind. Just the silent, spreading stain of darkness. Then, the unraveling began. A fisherman on the docks was the first to experience it. He was pointing up at the sky, a look of wonder on his face. He blinked, and his hand was gone. Not severed, not burned. It simply ceased to be. There was no blood, no pain. One moment, it was there. The next, it was not. He looked at the smooth, clean stump of his wrist, his mind shattering with a silent, horrified scream. All over the city, it started. A corner of a building would vanish, leaving a perfectly clean, impossible edge. A cart full of apples would become a cart full of half-apples, sliced with a precision no blade could match. A ship moored in the harbor was suddenly missing its entire bow, the sea pouring into a hole that had no cause. It was not destruction. It was erasure. Reality itself was being gently, methodically, and silently unwritten. The beautiful aurora was not a light show, it was a solvent, and the world was its canvas. Panic, when it finally hit, was absolute. A tidal wave of pure, primal terror. People ran, but there was nowhere to run to. The erasure was not spreading like a fire, it was happening everywhere at once, small, random pockets of non-existence appearing all over the city. The voice, the same one Naruto had heard from the seed in Oakhaven, echoed not in their ears, but in the collective consciousness of every living thing in the city. Be still. Do not fear. This is not death. This is serenity. The telepathic message only amplified the terror. This wasn't a monster they could fight. This was a concept, a philosophical argument with the power to enforce its conclusion. This was Maelstrom. Having gathered sufficient energy from the countless echo seeds it had planted across the continent, and supercharged by the vast magical fallout from the Aegis's destruction, Maelstrom had finally acquired enough power to manifest a true foothold in this reality. Harjan was not a target, it was a declaration. The news reached Fairy Tail via a frantic, terrified communication lacrima from the local guild, Blue Pegasus. The projection was shaky, showing their guild master, Bob, his usual flamboyance replaced by stark terror. It's all disappearing. The sky is wrong. People are just vanishing. There's nothing to fight. Oh, my beautiful boys are so frightened. The transmission cut out as the Blue Pegasus Guild Hall itself began to unravel. The scale of the threat was so immense, so alien, that it dwarfed every other concern. Dark guilds, political squabbles, the S-class trials, all of it became meaningless in the face of a power that could erase existence. The Magic Council was thrown into utter chaos. Their censors, their mages, their armies, all were useless. How do you fight something that isn't there? How do you attack an enemy whose very nature is absence? Chairman Valerius stood in his office, watching the live feed from Harjan, and for the first time in his life, he felt a sliver of genuine fear. His perfect, ordered world was being dissolved by a cosmic abstraction. His plans to capture Naruto, his political maneuvering, it all seemed so petty now. The god he coveted was powerful, yes, but could even a god fight nothing? His pragmatism, the core of his being, took over. The anomaly was no longer just a prize to be won. It was his only, and the world's only, hope. The humiliation was a bitter pill to swallow, but survival was paramount. He made a decision. He strode out of his office and into the pandemonium of the council chambers. Silence, he roared, his voice imbued with a rare, desperate magic that cracked like a whip. The room fell silent. The entity destroying Harjan is beyond our capacity, he stated, his voice cold and hard. It is an interdimensional threat. Logic dictates we use the only interdimensional asset we have. I am formally, on behalf of the Magic Council and the nation of Fiori, requesting the aid of the mage guilds. All of them. And I am formally requesting the aid of the anomaly known as Naruto Uzumaki. The message was sent. An official, desperate plea for help, broadcast. To every guild in the country. It was a complete surrender of his authority, a public admission of his own powerlessness. In the Fairy Tale Guild Hall, they received the message. Makarov looked at Naruto, a silent question in his eyes. Naruto's face was grim. He recognized the energy, the voice, the chilling philosophy. This was the source of the echoes, the main body of the creature whose seed he had destroyed. It calls itself Maelstrom, Naruto said to the assembled guild. It believes life, emotion, everything, is a cosmic flaw. It wants to cure the universe by erasing it. So we're fighting a nihilistic god from beyond space-time. Great. Sounds like a Tuesday, Kana muttered into her barrel, though her knuckles were white. This was no longer about protecting Naruto. This was about protecting their world. There was no debate, no hesitation. Fairy Tale mobilized. But this time, they were not alone. Messages of support poured in from other guilds. Lamia Scale, led by the stoic Juranikis. Mermaid Heel, with the fierce Kagura Mikazuchi. Quattro Cerberus, Sabretooth, and dozens of smaller guilds, all putting aside their rivalries. For the first time in history, the guilds of Fiori were uniting, not for a tournament, but for a war of survival. And at the center of it all, the reluctant, unofficial commander-in-chief, was Naruto. He didn't have time for the shock, or the pressure. He fell back on his training, his experience as a battlefield commander during the Fourth Great Ninja War. He needed intelligence, coordination, and a plan. Shadow Clone Jutsu. With 100 puffs of smoke, the guild hall was suddenly packed with identical blonde men, a chaotic sight that nonetheless brought a sense of order to the panic. Alright, listen up. Naruto, the original, yelled, hopping onto a table. The clones all fell silent, their attention absolute. I need eyes and ears. I need a global command network. Now. The clones moved with a single, shared purpose. They dispersed. Some ran, heading for the other guilds to act as direct liaisons, their speed far exceeding any magical communication. Others vanished, heading to a library with Levi to absorb every book she had on dimensional magic and ancient history. A dozen clones grabbed maps, charts, and communication lacrimas, transforming a corner of the guild hall into a makeshift command center. Naruto stood at the center of it all, processing information at an impossible rate. Clones would run in, report, Lamia Scale is en route to Harjin to assist with evacuation. Jura is with them. And then disperse into smoke, their knowledge instantly transferred to him. He was a whirlwind of strategic thought. Okay. We need to contain the panic. Natsu, Gray, your teams will focus on civilian evacuation in the surrounding towns. Stop the flow of refugees from overwhelming the capital. Laxus, he shouted, his eyes finding the powerful lightning mage. You're the fastest one we have. I need you on high-speed reconnaissance. Fly the perimeter of the Harjin anomaly. I need to know its size, its rate of expansion, if it has a physical core. Do not engage. Just observe. Laxus, who would have bristled at taking orders from anyone, simply nodded, a grim respect in his eyes. He recognized a true commander when he saw one. He transformed into a bolt of lightning and shot out of the hall. The entire guild, the entire country's magical force, was being organized and deployed with a speed and efficiency that was breathtaking. Naruto was not just a fighter, he was a leader, his charisma and decisive action a rallying point for the terrified nation. Erza, her arm now in a sling but her eyes clear and sharp, stood beside him, acting as his second-in-command. She translated his rapid-fire commands into terms the other mages would understand, organizing supply lines, coordinating with healers. They were a seamless unit, the king and queen on a chessboard the size of a country. A clone that had been with Levi dispersed, and new information flooded Naruto's mind. Okay. I've got something. According to ancient texts, these kinds of world wounds can sometimes be slowed or stabilized by pouring immense amounts of raw, stable magical energy into them. It's like cauterizing it. Where would we get that kind of power? Erza asked. Lucy, who had been poring over her own celestial spirit books, gasped. The celestial spirit world, she said, her voice trembling. It's a separate dimension, made of pure, stable magical energy. It's connected to our world through the 12 zodiac gates. Naruto's eyes snapped to her. Can you open a path? Not a path for people, she said. But maybe, if I could get all 12 zodiac keys together. I could open all the gates at once. It might create a massive surge of celestial energy, enough to push back against that thing. But that's impossible. Gray said. No one has all 12 keys. I know, Lucy said, her expression hardening with resolve. But I have 10. And I know who has the other 2. Yukino of Sabertooth. Naruto nodded. Good. That's a plan. A clone is already on its way to Sabertooth. Your mission, Lucy, is to get to Harjin and prepare that ritual. We have to buy you time. Hours passed. The situation in Harjin was growing more dire. The zone of erasure was expanding. Laxus returned, his face pale. There's no core, he reported. It's not a thing in the sky. The sky is the thing. It's like a hole in the world. And it's getting bigger. They were losing. Their efforts were slowing the panic, but they weren't stopping the threat. Naruto stood over the map, the weight of a world on his shoulders once again. He could feel Maelstrom's cold, alien consciousness, a silent, patient presence that was slowly, methodically digesting reality. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't fight it from here. He had to face it directly. Erza, he said, his voice quiet. Take over the command center. Keep the evacuation going. Naruto, what are you going to do? She asked, her eyes full of a new, terrifying fear. She knew that look on his face. It was the same one she'd had before she went to fight the Aegis. He turned to her, and for a moment, the commander was gone, and it was just Naruto. He gave her a small, sad smile. I'm going to go have a talk with the man in charge. He walked to the center of the guild hall. The mages, the clones, everyone stopped to look at him. Master Makarov, Naruto called out. I'm going up there. Makarov nodded slowly. I know. Naruto closed his eyes. He let the golden energy of the six paths fill him, but he didn't transform completely. He just let it lift him off the ground. He floated up, through the hole in the guild's roof left from a previous brawl, and ascended into the sky over Magnolia. He rose higher and higher, until the town was a toy set below. He turned to face south, toward the violet-black stain on the horizon. He was a tiny, golden speck against the vast blue sky. And he broadcasted his own thought, not with telepathy, but with a raw projection of his own immense life force, a challenge that any energy-sensitive being in the cosmos could feel. Hey! You! The one who likes to erase things. You want to talk about ending pain? You want to talk philosophy? Forget the appetizers. The main course is here. 100 miles away, the beautiful, silent aurora over Harjan wavered. The slow, methodical erasure paused. The alien consciousness, Maelstrom, which had been observing the frantic scurrying of the ants below with dispassionate curiosity, turned its full, undivided attention to the single, brilliant point of light that had dared to challenge it. A new voice, the true voice of Maelstrom, echoed in Naruto's mind. It was no longer just a cold whisper. It was a chorus of a billion dying stars, a symphony of entropy. The flaw. The anomaly. The bright, loud error that resists serenity. You have finally revealed yourself. Valerius, in his office, watched his sensors go haywire. The energy signature of the Harjan anomaly was changing, coalescing, focusing its entire attention on the single godlike signature of Naruto Uzumaki. A cold, terrible realization dawned on him. He hadn't just found a god. He had found one of two. And a war between them would shatter his world. The thought terrified him. But a deeper, darker part of him, the part that craved absolute control, was utterly, irresistibly intrigued. He didn't just need to defeat Maelstrom. He needed to become it. The first seeds of a new, more monstrous plan began to take root in the fertile ground of his ambition. Chapter 7, The Divine Accord. The sky had become a battlefield of wills. Two titans, invisible to the naked eye, faced each other across the breadth of a nation. One was a pinpoint of brilliant, defiant gold, the other, a spreading, silent stain of violet-black nothingness. The world held its breath, caught between them. Naruto hovered in the upper atmosphere, the air thin and cold, the curvature of the earth a faint, breathtaking line on the horizon. The sun was a fierce, unfiltered glare to his left, but to his right, the southern sky was dominated by the terrifying beauty of Maelstrom's manifestation. He could feel its immense, patient consciousness pressing in on him, a pressure that was not physical, but existential. It was the weight of a being that had seen universes die. You burn so brightly, Maelstrom's voice echoed in the cathedral of his mind. A brief, pointless flicker of complexity in the grand, serene dark. You prolong the suffering of your world. Its fear. Its agony. All of it is your fault. Surrender to the quiet. Let me grant you peace. You call this peace. Naruto projected back, his thoughts a blade of focused energy. Erasing people. Stealing their choices. Their right to even exist. That's not peace. That's tyranny. Choice is the engine of suffering. Hope is the precursor to disappointment. Love is the seed of grief. I am not a tyrant. I am a liberator. The philosophical assault was relentless, insidious. It was a poison designed to break the will, to make you question the very value of your own existence. Naruto could feel it trying to find the cracks in his spirit, the memory of Niji's death, the pain of Jiraiya's loss, the loneliness of his childhood. But he held firm, his own conviction a shield. You're wrong, he shot back. Love is also the reason to live. Hope is what gets you through the darkness. And suffering is what makes us stronger. You wouldn't understand. You've never had anyone to fight for. For the first time, he felt a flicker of something in Maelstrom's consciousness. Not anger. Not frustration. But a cold, clinical, curiosity. An interesting hypothesis. I will test it. I will remove that which you fight for. Let us see if your conviction remains when you are truly alone. The violet-black aurora over Harjan pulsed. Its nature changed. It was no longer just a passive, spreading solvent. A vast, shadowy tendril of pure void, miles long, detached from the main body and snaked through the sky with impossible speed. It wasn't moving through space, it was tunneling through it. Its target was not on the physical map. Naruto's sage senses screamed in alarm. He felt a distortion, a tearing, not in his world, but in a dimension adjacent to it. A place of sparkling, pristine energy. Down below, in the ruins of Harjan, Lucy was ready. She stood on the precipice of the unraveling city, the line of erasure a mere 100 feet away. With her were Yukino of Sabretooth, who had arrived with a squadron of her guild's mages, and a small, protective detail from Fairy Tail led by a determined Wendy and a battle-ready Carla. They're here. Yukino called out, holding up her two zodiac keys, Pisces and Libra. Lucy nodded, taking a deep breath. She laid her 10 keys on the ground before her in a precise arc. The 12 golden keys of the zodiac, gathered in one place for the first time in centuries. The air crackled with their combined power. O spirits of the 12 golden gates! Lucy began, her voice ringing with power and desperation. Your child calls to you. Our world is wounded. It bleeds into the void. I ask you not for battle, but for blessing. Lend us the light of your home. Open the way. 12-fold gate of the starry heavens. A brilliant, golden light erupted from the keys. The 12 zodiac gate symbols appeared in the air, forming a massive, rotating ring of pure magical power. A torrent of warm, golden energy, the very essence of the celestial spirit world, began to pour through the gate, crashing against the encroaching tide of Maelstrom's nothingness. The erasure slowed. The line of non-existence, which had been steadily advancing, was held at bay by the pure, life-affirming energy of the stars. They were buying time. But Maelstrom had anticipated this. The shadowy tendril it had dispatched arrived at its destination. It pierced the veil of reality and plunged directly into the heart of the celestial spirit world. In that realm of eternal twilight and crystal palaces, the celestial spirit king himself looked up in alarm as a wound of pure void tore open his sky. The tendril of Maelstrom began to drink the energy of his world, not with a chaotic hunger, but with the efficiency of a siphon. On Earth-land, the effect was immediate. The torrent of golden energy pouring from Lucy's gate sputtered, weakened. The spirits themselves cried out in her mind, their voices filled with pain. What's happening? Yukino cried. It's attacking their world directly. I can't hold the gate open much longer. Lucy gasped, sweat pouring down her face, the strain immense. The 12 keys were rattling, threatening to overload. High above, Naruto felt the shift. He felt Lucy's desperate struggle, the pain of the celestial spirits, the cold triumph of Maelstrom. He was spread too thin. He couldn't fight a philosophical battle in the sky and simultaneously protect Lucy's ritual. He was powerful, a god even, but he was a god of his own world. Here, he was a foreign body, running on finite reserves against an enemy that fed on the universe itself. He needed more power. He needed to connect to this world, just as he had connected to his own to achieve sage mode. He made a choice. He ended his psychic confrontation with Maelstrom, pulling his consciousness back into his own body. He descended, a golden meteor streaking across the sky toward Magnolia. He landed in the center of the now silent guild hall, the force of his arrival cracking the floor tiles. Every eye was on him. Erza, Makarov, Mira Jane, they all saw the grim resolve on his face. "It's not enough," Naruto said, his voice hard. "My power is my own. It's not native to this world. It's like I'm trying to put out a forest fire with a bucket of water from a different ocean. I'll run dry before I make a difference. Maelstrom is draining. The celestial world. Lucy can't hold on much longer. I need to tap into the life force of this planet. I need to become its sage." The mages stared at him, not understanding the terminology, but grasping the terrifying scale of what he was proposing. Makarov's eyes widened, a flicker of ancient, forgotten knowledge surfacing in his mind. "The divine accord," he whispered, the words tasting like dust and myth. "Master?" Erza asked. "It is one of fairy tale's oldest, most dangerous secrets," Makarov said, his voice trembling slightly. "A legend from the age when magic was wild and untamed. A ritual to commune directly with the planet's will, to temporarily become an avatar for the life force of Earth-land itself. It was said that the process would incinerate any normal mage, their spirit snuffed out by the sheer, overwhelming power of the world. It has not been attempted in over 400 years. His gaze locked onto Naruto. "But you are not a normal mage. You have already mastered the natural energy of your own world. You might be the only being in existence who could even attempt it. Who could survive it? Where is it?" Naruto asked, his tone leaving no room for argument. "There is a hidden grove, deep in the mountains behind the guild," Makarov said. "An ancient place where the flow of ether nano is at its most pure. It is where our guild's founder, Mavis Vermilion, first felt the pulse of the world. That is the only place it can be done." "Then that's where I'm going," Naruto declared. "It's too dangerous." Erza protested, stepping forward, her fear for him overriding everything else. "You could be destroyed." Naruto turned to her, and his hard expression softened. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "I survived a war against a goddess, being eaten by a giant snake, and multiple fights with Sasuke," he said, a ghost of his usual grin on his face. "I think I can handle a little chat with a planet. Besides," he added, his voice dropping, his thumb stroking her skin, "I have something worth coming back to this time." The promise in his eyes was absolute. It was not a boast. It was a vow. Erza's protest died in her throat. She could only nod, her own hand rising to cover his. "Be careful," she whispered. "No time to waste." Makarov commanded, shaking himself from his reverie. "Mira Jane, Laxus, Gildarts. You are the strongest we have. You will come with us. You will form a protective circle around the grove. We cannot allow anything to interrupt the ritual. Erza, you have command of the guild. Keep the evacuation efforts going. Keep buying Lucy time." The small, elite group moved. Naruto, Makarov, and Fairy Tail's S-class titans shot out of the guild and into the mountains. They moved with a desperate speed, scaling cliffs and leaping across chasms. They soon arrived at a place that felt different. It was a small, circular grove, untouched by time. A single, enormous tree with silver bark stood at its center, and the air was so thick with pure, raw ether nano that it was visible as a shimmering, golden-green mist. The very ground seemed to hum with life. "This is the place," Makarov said, his voice hushed with reverence. "The heart of the forest." "What do I do?" Naruto asked. "You must sit at the base of the tree," Makarov instructed. "Clear your mind. Then, you must reach out, not with your power, but with your spirit. You cannot take the world's energy. You must ask for it. You must form an accord, a partnership. You must prove to the planet that you are worthy of wielding its power." Laxus, Mira Jane, and the newly arrived Gildarts took up positions at the edge of the grove, their own immense magical pressures forming a formidable barrier. Naruto walked to the base of the ancient tree and sat, crossing his legs. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath of the thick, vital air. The energy here was incredible, a wild, untamed ocean of power. He could feel Kurama in his mindscape, pacing nervously. Kit, this is insane. This world's energy is chaotic. Trying to merge with it could tear your soul apart. I have to try, Naruto thought back. It's the only way. He began the process. He didn't try to draw the energy in, as he would with his own world sage mode. Instead, he did the opposite. He opened himself up. He lowered his defenses, his spiritual walls, and simply listened. He extended his consciousness, his very being, as an offering. I'm here, he projected, not to Maelstrom, but to the deep, humming life force of the planet beneath him. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I'm not from here. But my friends, my family, they are. Your children are in danger. A threat from outside has come, one that wants to silence you, to erase everything. I can't fight it alone. I need your help. Lend me your strength. Not as a weapon, but as a shield. Let me fight for you. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the world answered. It was not a voice. It was a feeling. A sense of ancient, slumbering consciousness stirring. It felt the sincerity in his offering. It felt the alien taint of Maelstrom. And it felt the fierce, protective love Naruto had for its inhabitants. It judged him. And it found him worthy. The golden-green mist in the grove began to swirl, faster and faster, forming a vortex around Naruto. The ground trembled. The great tree began to glow with an intense, internal light. The power of the world, the raw, untamed life force of an entire planet, surged not at him, but into him. The pain was absolute. It was 1,000 times more intense than gathering natural energy on Mount Myaboku. That had been like drinking from a river. This was like having the entire ocean forced into his body. His chakra network, his very cells, screamed in agony as they were flooded with an energy they were not designed for. The fusion was violent, a clash of two different universal laws. He gritted his teeth, a strangled cry escaping his lips. His body began to glow, flickering between the gold of his six paths power and the vibrant green of Earthland's life force. He was being torn apart and remade simultaneously. Outside the grove, Laxus, Mirajane, and Gildarts watched in horror and awe as the vortex of energy completely engulfed Naruto, hiding him from view. The sheer power radiating from the grove was so immense it was pushing them back, forcing them to brace themselves. By Mavis, Gildarts breathed, his seen-it-all composure completely gone. No one could survive that. Before them all, however, stood Erza. She had followed them. She couldn't stay behind, couldn't wait while the man she loved, put his very existence on the line. Her arm was still in a sling, her body still aching, but her will was absolute. She stood at the edge of the maelstrom of power, her scarlet hair whipping in the magical wind, her eyes fixed on the spot where Naruto had been. She couldn't fight this battle for him. But she could stand vigil. She could be his anchor. Come back, Naruto, she whispered, the wind snatching the words away. Come back to me. Inside the vortex, Naruto was losing himself. His consciousness was dissolving, merging with the vast, planetary mind. He saw the history of this world flash before his eyes, the rise of the dragons, the genesis of magic, the 400 years of Zeref's curse, the birth of fairy tale. He felt the planet's own slow, deep thoughts, its love for the creatures that crawled upon its surface, its fear of the silent thing that was eating it. He was about to be completely subsumed, his own identity erased, when he felt it. A single, tiny, unwavering point of light in the overwhelming sea of green. A familiar presence. A scarlet thread of fierce, stubborn loyalty and affection, reaching out to him. Erza. Her presence, her image, her feelings for him, it became his anchor. He clung to it, a drowning man clinging to a lifeline. He was Naruto Uzumaki. He was a shinobi of Konoha. He was a mage of fairy tale. He had promised her he would come back. With a final, monumental act of will, he asserted his own identity, not in opposition to the planet's power, but in concert with it. He was not its master. He was not its servant. He was its partner. Its champion. Its sage. The accord was struck. The vortex of energy imploded, collapsing back into Naruto's body with a soundless rush of power. The grove fell silent. The oppressive energy vanished, replaced by a calm, potent thrum. Where Naruto had been sitting, he now stood. He looked the same, yet he was utterly transformed. The golden glow of his six paths mode was still there, but it was now intertwined with a vibrant, pulsing green aura. His eyes were no longer just slitted, but glowed with a fusion of gold and emerald. His truth-seeking orbs, which had been pure black, now had faint, green circuits of light pulsing within them. He was a perfect, harmonious fusion of two worlds, of chakra and ether nano, of sage art and nature magic. He had become, for a time, an impromptu god of life itself. He opened his eyes and looked directly at Erza, a small, weary smile on his face. "Told you I'd be back," he said. Chapter 8, War of Two Worlds. The newly forged demigod took a single step, and the ground of the ancient grove seemed to sigh in reverence. The air around Naruto hummed, not with chaotic power, but with a deep, resonant harmony. He was a tuning fork that had set the entire planet to his key. The exhaustion, the pain of the ritual, it was all gone, replaced by a boundless, tranquil ocean of energy. He could feel every leaf on every tree in the forest, every blade of grass, every beat of a frantic rabbit's heart. He could feel the slow, deep grind of the tectonic plates miles below. And he could feel the desperate, flickering life of Lucy Heartfilia, hundreds of miles away, her connection to her spirits about to snap. There was no time for awe or reunion. Gildarts, Naruto's voice was a calm, multi-layered echo, the sound of wind through leaves and shifting stone. "Get to Harjin. Help with the defense. The real fight isn't going to be on the ground." Gildarts, a man who bowed to no one, simply nodded, his eyes wide with a respect that bordered on worship. He turned and vanished, his crash magic tearing a path through the forest as he raced south. Naruto turned his gaze to the sky. Maelstrom is hiding in a pocket of its own making. A dimension of non-existence. That's where it's siphoning the celestial world from. I have to go there. How? Laxus asked, the raw power radiating from Naruto making the lightning mage's own formidable aura feel like static electricity. "You can't just walk into another dimension." "I don't have to," Naruto said. He raised a hand, and one of his newly augmented truth-seeking orbs detached from the ring behind his back. It shot into the sky and expanded, not into a shield, but into a perfect, shimmering black circle, a hole in the blue canvas of the sky. It was a gate, created with the same principles of yin-yang release that Kaguya had used to traverse her dimensions. He looked at Erza, and for a moment, the god was gone, and it was just him. "Stay here. Stay safe." Erza's eyes, which had been wide with awe, hardened with a familiar, stubborn fire. Her sling was gone, discarded the moment she'd followed them to the grove. Pain was temporary, resolve was eternal. "No," she said, her voice unshakable. She walked toward him, her stride unflinching even in the face of his overwhelming new power. "You told me that pain is what lets you know you're alive, and sharing it is what makes you strong. You taught me not to hide behind my armor. You don't get to go fight a war for the fate of existence by yourself. Not anymore." She stopped in front of him, her hand reaching out, not to touch him, but to rest on the hilt of her sword. "Wherever you go, I go. That's the deal." Naruto looked at her, at the raw, unbending courage in her eyes, the absolute loyalty that asked for nothing in return. He saw the truth in her words. He had spent his whole life fighting alone, even when surrounded by friends. He had carried the burden because he thought he was the only one who could. She was offering not just to help, but to share the burden itself. A slow smile touched his lips. "Okay," he said softly. "But you'll need an upgrade." He reached out, and a stream of the golden-green energy flowed from his fingertips. It was the life force of the world, intertwined with his own divine chakra. It enveloped Erza, not with force, but as a gentle caress. It was not a spell. It was a blessing. "Wendy! Lucy!" Erza shouted, her voice amplified by the energy, ringing across the miles to her distant comrades. "I need you. Channel it through me." In Harjan, Lucy and Wendy, who were struggling to maintain the celestial gate, heard the call in their minds. "Erza!" Wendy gasped. "Do it!" Lucy urged, understanding instinctively. She placed a hand on Wendy's shoulder, and together, they focused their remaining power, not on the gate, but on their distant friend, using Erza's call as a beacon. A sliver of the brilliant, star-like energy of the celestial world, combined with Wendy's Sky Dragon Slayer enchantment magic designed to augment and empower, shot across the country and merged with the planetary energy Naruto was bestowing upon Erza. Her simple heart crew's armor began to glow, to transform. The steel plates dissolved, reforming into a suit of armor unlike any she had ever worn. It was a luminous, pearlescent white, edged with gold that mirrored Naruto's own aura. It was sleek and elegant, more like a celestial knight's garb than a warrior's plate. Faint, glowing constellations shimmered across its surface, and from her back sprouted wings made not of metal, but of pure, solidified starlight. "Requip, Starlight Chevalier," she breathed, the name coming to her unbidden. She could feel it. The armor was a conduit, a direct link to Naruto's own energy. It would allow her to survive the dimensional void. It tethered her existence to his. Naruto grinned. "Suits you." He took her hand, and together, they rose into the air and shot toward the black gate he had created. Just as they reached it, a furious roar echoed from below. "Hey! Don't you dare start the real party without me." A pillar of incandescent flame erupted from the forest floor. Natsu, propelled by a continuous, roaring blast of his fire dragon's breath, was flying toward them. His entire body was ablaze, his eyes burning with a furious, primal energy. He wasn't just using magic, he was magic, a living embodiment of the raw, emotional power of a dragon slayer. He had felt Naruto's transformation, the call to arms, the sheer, world-ending stakes of the moment. And his response, as always, was to charge headfirst into the heart of the fire. "You idiot!" Naruto laughed, a genuine, joyful sound. "You'll be incinerated. I'll take my chances." Natsu roared back. Fairy Tail doesn't let its friends fight alone. He was burning his own life force, his own magic, just to keep up. It was reckless. It was stupid. It was quintessentially Natsu. With a final, desperate burst of flame, he reached the gate just as Naruto and Erza were passing through it. Naruto, shaking his head with a fond exasperation, reached out and grabbed the back of Natsu's scarf, pulling him through the portal just before it snapped shut, leaving the blue sky of Earthland unblemished and serene. The world on the other side was a violation of the senses. It was a realm of silent, unending twilight, a three-dimensional canvas of Maelstrom's violet-black consciousness. There was no ground, no sky, only an infinite, empty expanse. Strange, geometric structures made of solidified nothingness drifted aimlessly, the ruins of other, forgotten worlds that Maelstrom had already cured. The silence was the most unnerving part, a total, absolute absence of sound that pressed in on the eardrums. Natsu immediately choked, the lack of air and the oppressive non-existence extinguishing his flames. "Can't breathe," he gasped, his face turning blue. Naruto, still holding his scarf, simply placed a hand on his chest. A bubble of the golden-green life energy enveloped Natsu, creating a breathable atmosphere and shielding him from the dimension's crushing void. "Stay close, you moron," he ordered. Erza, protected by her Starlight Chevalier armor, felt the void too, a cold pressure against her skin, but the tether to Naruto held her firm, an anchor of life in a sea of death. In the center of the infinite space, a form began to coalesce. Maelstrom, which had previously been an abstract presence, gave itself a body to confront them. It was a towering, vaguely humanoid figure, 30 feet tall, but its body was not solid. It was a shimmering, semi-translucent shell of violet energy, and within it, captured stars, nebulae, and entire galaxies swirled in a slow, hypnotic dance. Its face was a smooth, featureless mask of placid indifference. This was Maelstrom Prime, the entity's core consciousness. "You have brought the flaw into my sanctuary." Its voice was a calm, dispassionate hum that vibrated through the very fabric of the dimension. "You have brought noise into the silence where Fairy Tail," Natsu coughed, his fire reigniting within Naruto's protective bubble. "Making noise is what we do best." The battle began without another word. Maelstrom raised a hand, and the dimension itself became its weapon. A dozen of the floating geometric ruins shot toward them like meteors. Wood style, deep forest emergence. Naruto roared. He slammed his palms together, and the power of Earth-Land answered his call. From the empty void, a colossal, sprawling forest of massive trees erupted, their branches twisting and tangling to form a protective wall that intercepted the projectiles. The clash of primordial wood and solidified nothingness sent silent shockwaves through the dimension. Erza shot forward, her starlight wings beating. Sonic claw. She flew at Maelstrom, her blade glowing, and delivered a strike faster than sound. Her sword passed right through Maelstrom's form, which rippled like smoke. "Physicality is an illusion," it stated calmly. But the attack was a feint. As her sword passed through, she requipped in a flash of light, her blade changing to her Ice Queen sword. A burst of intense cold erupted from within Maelstrom's body, causing its ethereal form to momentarily freeze and solidify. "Now, Natsu," she screamed. Natsu, propelled by a controlled blast from Naruto, shot forward like a cannonball. Fire Dragon's brilliant flame. He unleashed his most powerful attack, a massive, concentrated fireball of pure draconic rage, and slammed it into Maelstrom's frozen torso. This time, the attack connected. The explosion of fire and ice was a silent, brilliant supernova of orange and blue in the twilight void. Maelstrom's form was blasted apart, dissipating into a cloud of violet mist. For a moment, they thought they had won. But the mist simply coalesced again, reforming, its placid mask unchanged. Pain. An interesting sensation. Primitive. But your attacks are based on the laws of your universe. Those laws do not apply here. Here, I am the law. Maelstrom extended its hand. It did not fire a beam or launch a projectile. It simply targeted Erza and deleted the law of gravity around her. She cried out in shock as she was suddenly pulled in a dozen different directions at once, her body stretched and contorted by the chaotic, directionless forces. Her armor protected her from being ripped apart, but the strain was immense. Naruto acted instantly. He formed a new hand seal. Sage Art, Yin-Yang Release, Law Restoration. He didn't attack Maelstrom. He targeted the space around Erza and used his divine power to reassert the fundamental laws of his own universe. Gravity snapped back into place, and Erza gasped, her body returning to normal. "It's not just fighting us," Naruto said, his expression grim. "It's fighting the very concept of our existence. It's trying to override us." This was a war of philosophies made manifest. Their every action was an argument for existence, for emotion, for life. Maelstrom's every counter was an argument for the peace of nothingness. Maelstrom, intrigued by their defiance, changed its tactics. It decided to test its hypothesis. "You fight for what you love. Let us see what you love," the dimension shimmered. And suddenly, they were no longer in the void. They were in Magnolia. The sun was shining, the canal was sparkling, and the guild hall was full of their laughing, cheering friends. Lucy, Gray, Wendy, Makarov, Mira Jane, all of them were there, waving. What is this? A genjutsu? Naruto muttered, his sage senses telling him this was more than a simple illusion. It was a perfect, tangible reconstruction, created from their own memories. Erza stared, her heart aching. It was home. Then, Maelstrom's voice echoed through the idyllic scene. This is the choice I offer. A world of perfect happiness. A permanent dream, free from pain, free from loss. No more fighting. No more goodbyes. Just this. Forever. Natsu looked at the laughing face of Igneel, his dragon father, who had appeared beside the guild hall. The sight was a punch to the gut. Igneel. Erza saw the children from the Tower of Heaven, not as slaves, but happy and free, playing in the streets. Her resolve wavered. A world where they were all safe. Where her past was healed. Naruto saw his parents, Minato and Kushina, standing at the door of Ichiraku Ramen, waving him over. He saw Jiraiya, alive and well, laughing with the third Hokage. Everything he had ever lost, everything he had ever fought for, right there. A perfect, painless world. The temptation was a physical weight, a sweet, seductive poison that promised an end to all struggle. Why fight? Why endure so much pain, when this perfect peace was being offered? It was Erza who broke the spell. She looked at the perfect, happy illusion of Jalal, and then she looked at Naruto, at the real, solid, breathing man beside her, the man who had walked into her darkness and told her it was the source of her strength. This illusion, this perfect world, was beautiful. But it wasn't real. The pain was part of their story. The struggle was what made their bonds real. It's a beautiful lie, she said, her voice quiet but firm. She turned her back on the illusion of her saved friends and faced the empty space where she knew Maelstrom was watching. But we choose the painful truth. Natsu looked from the image of Igneel to the faces of Naruto and Erza, his real friends, his real family, standing beside him in the dark. He grinned, a fierce, feral thing. Yeah. A dream is no fun if you can't fight for it. Naruto looked at the smiling faces of his parents, and his heart clenched. But then he looked at Erza, at her unwavering resolve, and he knew. This piece was a cage. A beautiful, comfortable cage, but a cage nonetheless. His life had been hard, full of pain and loneliness, but it was his. And he had finally found a new family to share it with. He wouldn't trade them for a perfect lie. He gave a final, loving look to the image of his parents. Goodbye, he whispered. Then he turned, his resolve like adamant. He spoke the words that were the core of his entire being, the philosophy he had learned not from books or scrolls, but from a lifetime of enduring and overcoming. You're right. Love leads to grief. Hope leads to disappointment. Life leads to death. But that's what makes it worth it. You don't get the good without the bad. The joy of a hello is only possible because you know the pain of a goodbye. You want to erase all the pain. Fine. But you'll be erasing all the good that comes with it. And that's a price we're not willing to pay. As he spoke, their combined conviction, Erza's acceptance, Natsu's passion, and Naruto's belief, acted as a weapon. The perfect, illusory world of Magnolia shattered like glass, revealing the cold, dark void once more. Maelstrom's placid form flickered, a sign that their rejection had, on some level, damaged it. They had not attacked its body, but its very ideology. Flawed, the entity hummed, its voice holding a new, colder edge. You are fundamentally flawed. If you will not accept the gift of serenity, then you will be erased and your universe will be unmade, piece by painful piece. The real battle was about to begin. Maelstrom began to draw on its full power. The dimension itself began to groan, to collapse in on them. Naruto met the challenge, his own divine energy flaring out, a sun of life pushing back against a universe of death. Erza and Natsu stood at his side, no longer just his friends, but extensions of his will, soldiers in a war between two opposing realities. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.